Hey everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to One Cross Radio, and today we are finally rejoined by my Into the Weeds cohort, Christian Dobson, aka Carpenter Foreman, aka Carpenter Arcade, aka the one and only Jimi Hendrix.
Oh my gosh! Go on. No, there was like I was watching Community the other day, and you know how like they had that episode with like. They had like the little like so so they were getting hacked, right? The school was getting hacked.
Oh,
and they
man,
had like you had the kid
so
officer, and then they brought in like they find the hacker and it's like another little kid. But like all of his online handles are like so crude but very funny. And like I was like listening, I'm like I gotta remember these like in case I ever need them. And like that was a moment wherein I needed them and I totally forgot. And it feels so bad. I'm so frustrated right now.
In a way, I'm kind of glad they got forgotten because they might have been something that got cut out.
I mean, of course, I would have tried to do my best to editorialize, but like, but I think they were fairly like clean yet
crude.
Yeah, it was good.
Not something like where South Park, where it would be like funny but just clearly crude.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was tongue in cheek. There was enough wiggle room for everyone to appreciate what was happening, right?
So Christian, it's been a while, man. We've been trying to
3 hours.
All right, so listener, just to clue you guys in, legit 3 hours ago, Christian and I sat down to start recording this episode, and then we went into the weeds about every other thing, and then we're like, dude, I'm getting tired. We need to record.
Dude, have you seen that Netflix there's a Netflix movie based on a Stephen King book called Into the Tall Grass?
No, I haven't.
It's like an okay horror movie. I'm not gonna say it's the greatest, but it's good. Like I enjoyed it. It's just like this tall grass. This brother and sister. The sister's pregnant. They're going to go to the city and put the kid up for adoption, but they stop because she has to throw up because she has morning sickness. And then they hear a kid calling from the grass, and they go into the grass and they cannot get out, and it becomes this whole thing. But
that's a very Stephen King premise.
Oh man, his premises are so like. What anyone could have thought of it, nobody did. What the heck? Like, it makes so much sense that you would make that a premise. But yeah, that's how I feel like with our conversations. Like you get in, it's the weeds. You get into the tall grass and you can't find your way out, and you're there for an eternity, right? Yeah, but it's great. It's a lot better. Like it's a lot better than the actual tall grass in the movie. I would take this over that any day of the week.
Well, I also find with us what. There is a place for that, and it helps because also at like not with today's so much, but I can see
counterproductive today.
Well, no. Well, like with today's topic, because even though like listener, we're going into the weeds and just talking about Shin Godzilla, a movie that I absolutely love. For me, it's like one of the best movies I've seen in the last 10 years. Like I really put it up there, but because the movie has a political take to it. I was aware earlier. I'm like, oh man, okay, like we could easily jump from like the story of the politics within the movie to politics in real life that there's emotion and frustration and anger attached to. So in that 3 hours beforehand, like right off the bat, we almost touched on that stuff and we got the angst out. So it's like, okay, now we can actually stick to the movie. It wasn't intentional, but it was beneficial where it's like, hey, we can do this in that way where it's like, oh, we're clear-headed and we're constructive and we're not talking about the stuff that brings up that rage.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. I didn't even consider that. Yeah, no, it's that makes a lot of sense. For sure.
There are pros to it, but also we're just like, it's been 3 hours. Where'd that time go? We're both really tired.
Yeah, we're super tired when we got on the phone, right?
I know.
Or the chat.
Yeah.
A lot more awake now. Weird.
Oh, yeah. But originally, I was saying it's been a while since we've been able to do an episode together, just because both of us have gone through, like, to varying degrees and different journeys with the anxiety and the depression and all that entails, where it's like motivation to even, like, we're motivated to get together and chat. But then at times you're like, I have no capability of being social, let alone slightly, I don't want to say controlled, but where you're like, I'm aware of like, I'm recording and we want to make sure it's like not off-putting or anything like that, and like all the natural social stuff where you're just like, I'm not feeling that. Like regular social stuff, like with a friend where I don't have to do that, let alone keeping in mind like other listeners and being fair to them, even if I'm bringing up a point that I disagree with. Like, there's so much stuff that comes into it that just for a long time we'd be chatting, but through text, we're just like, I've missed you, man.
Yeah. It's gotten. Yeah, I noticed like it's gotten more difficult for me to speak on that level to people, which is weird because it feels like a regression, right?
Well,
I don't know. I guess things are just sort of happening. I got to get back. I got to like it's like I haven't really been a person for a while, and I got to get back to being a person and all that entails. And once you start like shirking off like certain responsibilities or obligations, not necessarily like planned ones, but things are just they come as a natural result of just being an adult. It really you start to like let other things slip by the wayside, right? Like there's something to be said for like momentum.
Oh yeah. And I'll say I don't think you've regressed at all. Like that wasn't meaning that. I just mean like I know I've been feeling at points like even with chatting with the guys, there'll be conversations about light stuff or heavy stuff, and I'm just like I'm not capable of any of these. Like I know with you guys I can be the most relaxed version of myself or whatever, which listener, I'll be honest, like that's pretty much me here, although here I might be a little more I'll be more sensitive to how things could come off, not that I'm censoring or anything, but like with you guys I can be even less so, but I'm just like I'm just not capable of any conversation right now. That requires thought or that requires patience, and I can present, like I can do it, but I just can't do it. I don't have that energy. Like when we've had conversations, you've done all of that, but it even that when you're battling anxiety and depression is draining, and then doing things in any creative sense is draining, even though it's fueling. It's weird.
Yeah, having to show up, in any capacity it's starting to like even just, there'd just be days on it. Like even just the past like 3 or 4 days where like literally all I've done is watch horror movies all day long. Like I'm not eating right. I'm not eating enough. I'm not moving. It's just stuff like that. It's like, oh, geez, man, I really gotta. It's one thing starts to slip, and then other things start to slip, and then eventually you find yourself, you're like, oh crap, I gotta dig myself out of this hole. It's like I don't know, I've started working out again, and it's good. Like I'm starting to feel a bit of like momentum picking up again, which is good. But like the whole having to find a new job thing, I'm just like, I really don't want to. I so don't want to. I'm really considering just applying to TPH again. Just reapplying because apparently my old manager, he got fired like a few months after I left.
Oh dang.
And I'm like, I shouldn't have left. Like maybe I just left because like they're like, oh, you can come back in now, right? And I'm like, I don't know, dude. There's like 1,000 cases a day, and I don't really want to come back into College Park. Like, and not only that, but like I had to sit with this dude who like I don't like literally all day and do nothing. Yeah. It's 8 hours next to someone, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to be here. I don't think it's just, stupid. Yeah. Anyway, Shin Godzilla.
Yes. And I'll also say, like, listener, one of the intentions I have before we get into this topic that we were going to get into, one of the reasons I like bringing up the fact that we're going through this is, I'll argue, I think it's important to normalize this kind of thing. Just because so many people struggle with anxiety and depression and everything. And for the longest time, it didn't get talked about. And now it's just like, look, I just want to address it because this is a normal reality for so many people. And even if just addressing it makes that like someone else feel more comfortable in bringing it up, awesome. I don't see a reason why not to.
To speak to that, I recently saw a post on Reddit where someone, it was like the Toronto subreddit or the AskTO subreddit, and someone's like, "Hey man, like I even just got this new promotion and I can't focus. Like I don't care about my job. Like I just watch videos and like I just want to leave and stuff." And it's like, I posted like, well, like, you know, a lot of people are saying this is depression, which I agree it most likely is, but you got to ask yourself, like, is this not the natural reaction to your circumstances, like as a human being? Like, is it not? Like, is it not reasonable for you to be depressed given your circumstances? Like, he has monetary wealth, he has success, but he has no real purpose beyond selling his time to other people or making up goals for himself within the framework of, like, how much, like, if I achieve this goal, how much am I going to get paid type of thing, right? So, you know, a lot of people, and I was like, what are we doing? Why am I spending 8 hours making somebody else money? Or, you know, exponentially more compared to what I get paid, right? To afford the house I'm never in, the car I use to get to work and back on the family, to support the family I'll never see. You know, am I solving the world's problems? Am I doing anything to improve the society, the material conditions of my fellow citizens? No. I'm not doing anything substantial.
Well, one thing I also appreciate about you bringing that up, because I'll agree, like, yes, all of that is true and all of that is something people face. But I think even like a good reason to normalize it is, like you even brought up, like the guy is making money. And for a long time, people had the attitude, like, wrongly. And some people will still, to a degree, push this attitude, like, well, if you're financially well off, like, you're not going to be depressed. Like, you have no reason to be depressed. Where it's like, that doesn't impact, like, financial status
doesn't necessarily, no.
It doesn't necessarily impact mental health.
Yeah. Well, you see those, you know, that meme of Oprah saying, or no, it was like Oprah and like Prince William or Harry or whichever one. And they're like, money doesn't buy happiness. And it's like, well, you know what poverty buys? Nothing. So what, like, you know, and you know, there's this, I saw this tweet, it was a really funny tweet from a therapist. She's like, you know, as a psychiatrist, you know, I can like honestly say a lot of my patients' issues would be solved with money.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think there's something to be said, like, yeah, obviously money isn't going to solve all your problems. And obviously if you have, like, I think there's something to be said where if you have so much money that you, like, money isn't an issue, then that comes with its own host of psychological pitfalls, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously, yeah, like people who are rich aren't, you know, they're just, you know, they could just as likely be depressed, right? Because you're getting all this money and then you think, oh, well, why am I getting all this money? Like, what am I contributing to the society? Like, am I doing anything?
It's going to be like the depression, the commonality is the depression. It's going to, how it's impacting them is going to be different. Like someone's financial situation, if it's a bad one, if it's a poverty one, that of course is going to impact them very differently than the finances, like the depression were for the rich person, and how those issues get solved is like, well, that would solve that. Yeah. But like a rich person could face the same questions of like, what am I doing that's like having any impact? Like struggling with that self-worth, all those things where it's like that, like class structure or whatever, like this is a problem that reaches across it. And this is, oh man, like we could do an episode about this.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, dude, like even like someone who has pretty ugly or heinous beliefs, they could also be depressed because like they're not seeing like the world, like they're not seeing their beliefs or what they would like to see implemented, right? Like maybe people who believe, you know, I'm not, okay, let's not get into it, but you know what I mean, right? Like I assume you can think of like any nefarious person.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There's, you know, like the world isn't the way I want it and that's making me depressed. It's like, yeah, but like the world shouldn't be the way you want it because your point of view is wrong, right? But anyway, let's talk about Shin Godzilla.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault, man. Yeah. It's both of us. It's definitely.
Yeah, no, it's a good to talk about, but yes, Shin Godzilla. So I've already said my Cliff Notes version about this movie, and I've been asking you, like, I had suggested you to watch this since we recorded our episode on the Frighteners last year. I was really happy that that you were like, yeah, I'm gonna watch it. What did you think?
Did you want me to read the whole plot for this movie too, or?
No.
No, because I remember last time you're like, this is kind of going on for a while, and I'm like, it is, isn't it? And then I just kept going.
It's like, the synopsis is this. I'm like, this ain't a synopsis.
Yeah, the synopsis is like usually 2 or 3 sentences. I'm like, oh, this is just literally
summary essay.
Yeah, this is like, it's just almost beat by beat what the plot is, right? Like every plot point. I mean, if you hadn't seen The Frighteners, it's a pretty comprehensive explanation of who
it is.
I
guess the summary of Shin Godzilla would be it is I'll argue a modern retelling or modern adaptation of the original Godzilla concept of a creature adapted, a warning story about nuclear testing or nuclear fallout. The impact that can have on nature. But it was also a very personal story from the director and the writer, like that team who did Evangelion, for them about what they felt was the governmental response to that really rough 2010 Japan had, where they had the Fukushima disaster and then the tsunami and the earthquake, like these natural disasters. And then it's a fascinating exploration about well-intended government, but with so much red tape that it gets in the way from anything getting done in the guise of this giant monster movie. For me, it's the closest one to capture the spirit of the original while still standing on its own feet. It's the only Godzilla movie from Toho that was never a direct sequel to the original. It's its own thing, but it's very much the spirit of the first one.
That's one thing I guess I got from it, because like I don't really have a lot of context within which to frame my interpretation of the movie. So like mine is more so like what I've noticed like culturally that's different between like Western films or the manner in which a Western movie would approach the material, as opposed to the way they did. So like one thing that stood out to me, I'm like, there's a lot of focus on bureaucracy here. Yeah. But the focus because when I'm thinking like of American disaster movies, they really don't focus on any of that stuff, right? Like not a lot. It's not prominent in any way. So this was like a huge focus of the movie. It's almost like Godzilla was kind of like a secondary thing to the showing just how the bureaucracy worked, right? And the other thing was, I was like, my thought was like, oh, Japanese people must really dig efficiency and stuff, like which is sort of the cliche. Like you kind of assume that they do, and I'm like, they're actually working fairly efficiently compared to what I would imagine how the states would be working, or like they're all in the same room. They all have like very up to date information. They're all like focused and sharing the relevant information with the relevant parties. Like everyone's weighing in. Nobody's talking over each other. Nobody's fighting. I'm like, this is the most functional bureaucracy I've ever seen in my life. Like I can't think of it. Like this is the most. Like it's almost unrealistic how well it's functioning. Like
that is such an interesting take.
Yeah, because you imagine like you're like, oh, the bloated bureaucracy. I'm like, dude, they're like as well as any bureaucracy is going to work. That worked. Like, look at the plan they came up with on the fly. Look at how coordinated, like all these different. Because like I'm thinking of the logistics about their plans. I'm like, the trains, they have to get these trucks here. They have to have the fluid here. They showed it. They did show that. They showed them getting it right. So
that was definitely displayed in the latter half of the movie. The first half, and it's something I loved about it that I found some groups of the audience or people seeing it for the first time are like, what's going on? We're jumping like all around, like everybody's getting introduced with a name, with a title, and then certain characters, their title was being added to, so it just kept getting longer. And they're like, what's the point?
Like, screen.
What's the point? Why are we jumping from this meeting to this meeting to like this meeting? And it's like, they're talking about the same thing all within the first half hour. And it's like, no, that's the point though, because they have all this structure. They got to be like, okay, it's just the department heads, but now it's the entire departments with also those core people. But now this new thing has popped up, and we got to go back to the department heads, and we got to respect everybody's jurisdictions, which in and of itself is fine. But because this is unprecedented, we've never done this. We don't know. Does this fall under your jurisdiction? Well, no, because it's technically this. And then sets up all this stuff where you're like, no, this could be efficient, but it's also like nothing is getting done right away because they're like, what does this fall under?
Well, there's too many things to consider, right? Like, I mean, when you consider like everything that's going on, like given the fact that like this has never happened before, there was a little bit of like infighting right at the beginning where they're trying to figure out what it is. But as soon as they figured out what it was, like everyone was sort of on the same page. And like you're right, because like they did eventually have to design their own task force, the people who were like rebels and outsiders, and you know,
the rebels, the outsiders, the losers, the heretics, like
that cliche thing.
Well, yeah,
you guys think outside the box.
That one might have been the most on the nose thing, and I'm like, okay, that you can criticize that as too cliche, but I'm fine with it.
There was a lot of dialogue in that movie, Chris, that was very suspect to me, but I can't remember enough where I'm just sort of like, it's clearly there's like their language is a lot more functional than ours in a lot of ways, like a lot more like to the point, to the like when you look at like the way the white people were talking, or like when you that ambassador, the U.S. ambassador who is of Japanese heritage, she wanted to be the president. I'm like, dude, your English is nowhere near good enough for you to be president. No one's going to vote for you. That's never going to happen. Have you seen America? So have you ever been to America?
So that's interesting, because that's also been some of the common criticism I've seen of the movie, where it comes up. Sorry.
Before, I just want to finish the point of, like you're right. Like it was, I think the bureaucracy was as efficient as it could be given the situation which is why they needed to make the task force. But I mean, the task force wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't like the natural conclusion. Like that was something they could have really messed up, but it was a very good decision.
Within that performer, I'll say like the movie is also interesting because I'll be like, that is where you also have to add some suspension of belief, because
no, I'm not being. I'm just being mean.
No. I'm not. I don't take that as mean. That's been a common criticism, but it's also like, especially with most of the Toho acted Godzilla movies, 99% of the cast is Japanese actors who don't whose first language isn't English, and there's only very rare times where they've hired, I'll say, actual English actors. Most of the time, especially when it's military, it's just any American military personnel who are stationed in Japan. And it's like, hey, just read this line. So it comes off as comically flat. Like, as much as the apex scene of the movie visually is the Tokyo in flame sequence, like, payback time, Roger, payback. You're like, okay, this is like what you think.
Yeah, or like even the conversation between the president and her and the ambassador, like on the plane, like I'm like, this is so stilted and kind of weird. But it's like, dude, what do you go? Okay, like, here's the thing, Chris. You know me. I'm not here to like look at a movie and judge it by like, I'm not going to judge this movie against something like Schindler's List or something, right? So a lot of these criticisms, like, obviously they're fair in the sense that they're valid, in the sense that like the things we're referring to are what we're referring to. They exist. But like, if, you know, you could say it in like, okay, this is funny. You know, it's funny, right? Like, it's like, obviously that doesn't make sense. But it's Godzilla, absolutely, dude. Like, you really want to get into it. You want to nip it. Why are you watching it at all? Right? Like, if you're gonna, like, if you actually, like, because to me, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just funny. It's like that there's so many things like that where I'm like, or like, what, like, do they not, wait, what, do you know what the healthcare situation is over there? Like, do they have universal healthcare? Because, dude, like I think
so.
It was super rare to find like a set of teeth in that movie that were straight. They were almost like, there's so many mouths filled with teeth that were worse than mine were. And I'm like, what is going on here?
That's actually not anything I noticed.
No, eventually I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, like, as someone who spent their whole life with bad teeth, like, it is something I sort of noticed, right? But, well, until recently, yeah, so I need to emphasize though that, like, the different, like, there's a real difference in the level of like attractiveness between your average American extra or like any person they're putting on film and in Japan, which honestly, like, I liked the fact that like, not like, people did have kind of messed up people just look like normal people, right?
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is the Japanese woman who's born in America, right? She's the most like attractive character in the entire. Maybe the lead is. I don't know. I'm sort of iffy on men. Period. Never mind men from like other races. Like that's even more difficult for me to tell. I'm serious, dude. Like, I
get you.
As a white guy, like, I mean, like another white guy, I can pretty much tell who's attractive, right? But when we get another rate, like it gets really. I'm not good at it. I don't know why.
Well, one thing I agree with you. One thing I appreciate about so many Japanese films in general, but also I'll also say with the Godzilla films,
yeah,
like this one, they hired actual people. Now that's like in the sense of it's something we're seeing now in North American shows where I still dig Friends, but the idea was like with casting Friends, like, oh, everybody has to be this insanely sexy, attractive young single. Whereas now we're getting to a point where it's like, hey, not everybody has to be the glamour model when they're like on the show. That's a sensibility that Japan has seemed to have forever with a lot of their casting. Like, I'm not like, yeah, the guy who played the lead dude whose name is now just immediately slipping my mind. Like he is like the attractive lead, but he's also like, he's not like a supermodel. The woman playing the US Japan ambassador, she was like the most attractive woman in the movie, but also it's like, no, you that's someone you could also know off the street. Like it's not just like, hey, let's fill the movie with all the pretty people.
Yeah, she's not Scarlett Johansson or anything. Yeah. No. I think it's like, it's like a straight dude. I think like it's always sort of difficult to tell when another man's attractive. Like, I mean, it's a lot easier for me when like they have like feminine features. You know what I mean? Like when like yeah, like it's just like Brad Pitt, like clearly he's a pretty man, you can tell, right? You can like and with like DiCaprio, you can see like in his eyes, like obviously
Clooney always, but Clooney at the height of his ER fame, you were like, okay, that dude's the hunky dude, and then now he's like, that's the silver fox, funny Clooney. Like,
yeah, and the lead from Godzilla, like he had like very good jawline, right? Like good cheekbones. Yeah, I could tell, but like
the aesthetic.
Yeah, and when people are like, oh, Idris Elba's hot, and I'm like, I don't know, dude. He doesn't look like Brad Pitt, so I'm not sure how to like. I don't know how, like, you know what I mean? Like that's what I'm saying. So I'm just
but also like it's something I appreciate with other movies, and it seems like where we're getting now.
Oh no, you sorry, Chris, I'm so sorry. No, you said that like Japan has had that like the ethos for a while, where like they don't track, they don't. Yeah, I think that's very dope. Like that. I mean, obviously, I think it's more of an indicator of how obsessed we are in the West with stuff like that, and how we shouldn't be preoccupied with things like that, because that doesn't.
Well, also, like attractiveness is something that's so subjective. Like it's. I'll argue it's not just a universal thing where something like someone's like someone you could be like, oh, they're like physically attractive, but then if you find them to be like with a terrible personality or just stuff where you're like, this is something that I'm not interested in, or I find annoying, or something like that, that impacts your attraction level. So someone being like, oh, I think Idris Elba is like crazy hot. It's also like Idris Elba is incredibly charming and down to earth. And that would impact that. That's the thing with Clooney. Like he might be super rich and at times come off as pretentious, but he can also come off as super accessible. Like, look, if you don't like Batman and Robin, I apologize. And here's $10. Like there's something about that attraction isn't just physical features, is all I'm saying. Hopefully
if we're speaking purely in the realm of like physical attractiveness, I think there are like objective markers, but like obviously that's going to be on a spectrum, because like there are going to be people who are attracted to things that like physically as a rule that most other people aren't attracted to, which is, it takes all types, right?
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah, back to the movie.
I don't want to talk about the attractiveness of men of different races anymore. I feel like it's a lightning rod. And every time I come on your podcast, I say something that like vaguely makes me regret coming on. So I can think of one thing from like every episode we've done where I'm like, I should never have said that.
I'll be 1,000% honest with you. I have never ever gotten any feedback from anybody being like, anything that you've said is offensive. I've also never heard anything from somebody saying I've said anything offensive.
Oh, it's not necessarily offensive, but also just like embarrassing.
Fair.
Like, you know, like I shouldn't have shared that, or I should have worded that differently. You know, like yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
lead me, because again,
sorry. Yeah, it's interesting with this movie just because the Godzilla franchise, it is one I love, and it's one that I think you can point to as a franchise where it's never just this one thing. Like, as much as I love Shin Godzilla, and to me, I'm like, it's one of the best movies, like one of the, I'll say films, like with a capital F, that I'd be like, of the past 10 years, even in I don't compare it to, say, the legendary Godzillas, where it's like King of the Monsters and Godzilla versus Kong. Like, those are just as much Godzilla, but in a different way. And they're looking at different aspects of the characters and the fun. And I'm like, I love those movies just as much, but in a very different way. They don't make me think about things like this movie does, because this movie shows, I really appreciate with this movie, its take on politics, because it addresses politics and at times political inefficiencies, but it's not doing it in a heavy-handed way. It's not going through like, hey, Japan, we suck. It's like, hey, this is where some of our stuff, like, we're too bogged down in our bureaucracy and it can lead to bad stuff. Or the very interesting take of the partnership with the U.S., where towards the end of the movie, the U.S. and the United Nations being like, look, this could be a problem that could become an issue from everyone else. So you got to evacuate. We'll help you recoup, but we're going to bomb you. Like, we got no choice. No other, like, so few other countries is that a problem for. Like, that wouldn't happen with Canada. That wouldn't, like, to that degree, like, we might go along with it, but it might be like something like, okay, we'll agree with this. We're not automatically in a position where the rest of the world will just tell us, like, hey, we're going to do this. You don't have the choice.
I kind of feel like literally any country other than the United States or maybe China would be in that position, right? Because what do they, Japan, if they refuse, they get destroyed. If they agree, they get destroyed. They really have no, they agree, like, if they agree, they get one city destroyed. If they disagree, it's sort of like, are you going to nuke any of the countries that want to come in and nuke Godzilla? What are you going to do? Are you going to start a war with them? Are you going to let Godzilla just destroy your country? Like, what are you going to do, right?
But with Japan in particular, it's because of their history, because of the treaty and the signings after World War II, where it's like, they can't just do this. Like, there's limitations on what they can do within their own country. Like, why the SDF, I think, the defense force, like, it's a defense force. It's not an army. Yeah. And when they were in that original meeting, it's like, can we deploy? Like, no, because it's just this, and it doesn't meet the criteria of this treaty. Like,
well, that was their argument for not being able to bring in the U.S. at the time, right? Which I guess fell apart because they brought in the U.S. eventually.
Yes, at the time, but it's also like they couldn't decide they couldn't just do it because it would be a violation of that treaty. And then it's like, to make a decision for our own country, we have to go to another country.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. Like, there is a lot of, like, I'm not saying, like, that's not the reality. Like, I get the point. Like, that totally makes sense. It totally tracks with the situation in real life, for sure. But yeah. I'm just saying, like, their point is like, oh, like, I just think it's maybe not the greatest circumstance or like
that's
the
fair.
way to frame it. Because I'm like, literally if there was a Godzilla level threat in any other country and the world was like, we need to get rid of it, that country would have no say in it. Like, it really wouldn't. Like, I can't imagine a world wherein, like, the entire rest of the world wants to bomb a thing inside your country and you're going to be able to prevent that from happening. I don't see how any country could do that, again, other than maybe the United States or China.
Right. No. And I get that, but I also think the point for
I
me,
know.
my
But it's not a good point
yeah.
because you can map it onto literally any other country.
No.
Right?
My interpretation of the point was like, we're not even being like, we don't even have the choice. We don't even
I can
have
see
the
how it
choice to say no.
resonates with Japanese people. I can totally see how, given their culture, but like logically, it's an argument you can make for literally any other country. So it kind of like does like you. I mean, it obviously does make sense within the context of Japan, but it could make just as much sense logically, maybe not like culturally.
Yeah.
In any other country. Okay, so that's my point, I guess. So
no.
I get pedantic like that, right? That's why the sequels make me so angry.
Oh yeah, listeners, we're not getting into the conversation now because we did part of that 3 hours was a good like hour and a half, which will maybe be its own episode one day. Maybe.
Yeah. I would like to do a little bit of research before coming on because there's a lot of stuff that I've read that I've forgotten that at the time I was like, this is you can't ignore this point. Like it's an infallible point, and I can't remember.
That was an interesting thing. And also with Japan, like just the resignation, like that all the characters were feeling when that was said, just because of that, like the history of Japan.
It was just like, crap, you're right.
And like,
we'll just cut.
Yeah. It's just like, crap, this is happening again. Like this has happened to us twice on purpose and once accidentally. And we're the only country that this says like Castle Bravo, like something that was like a huge inspiration in the original Godzilla because America was testing atomic bombs, but it was in the area of Bikini Atoll, and there was a Japanese fishing boat, the Lucky Dragon 5, that was in the area. Someone didn't do the due diligence to make sure that these people weren't there, and then as the boat went back, the crew died, the radiation did spread to a less degree. So like the history of Japan with nuclear radiation is tragic. And so like that impacts as well. It's like, here's this nation again, like, even though, yes, it might be the right thing to do, but like, again, and it's us again, this hasn't happened to other places. And
yeah, they keep getting nuked, eh?
Like that's just
through their own mistakes or through the United States.
And it's fascinating and tragic. And I appreciated them bringing that up. So like, it's interesting with this movie as well, because I think a lot of this stuff that, and with other Godzilla movies, I'll argue, and with I think Japanese media, and you can make the argument all media, but maybe less so North American because it's made to be as accessible as possible. But like Japanese media is like so much like within its cultural stuff, like what they do in their shows, what they'll talk about in their shows, how they do their stuff in the shows is so different than us. But then in the case of this movie, like, it's a political movie, but how it talks about it and addresses things is very different than how we do. And that's some of the things I appreciate, because I'm like, hey, how we talk about politics or how we buff against stuff isn't always the best way. And I appreciate seeing that. Like, at no point in this movie, this very political movie, did I think it was being preachy, because it was showing the pros and the cons. And it wasn't trying to paint anybody in a negative light. It was just showing some of the bad stuff.
Like, did a very good job of not coming off as like trying to hit you over the head with a metaphor or an allegory, right? Yeah. The
scene with the prime minister, like one that comes in particular that could have been played for laughs, to be like, hey, this guy's a buffoon, is just like, oh no, that was hilarious.
Yeah, that did. I was like, oh crap, this guy is in way over his head. And then it was shown to be that wasn't the case.
Well, also it's because it's like, hey, it's hierarchy. We got to go with the most senior guy. And this was a guy who was like, I do this. I'm not the person to run a country.
Creed's in the manager's chair all the time.
But
get me our biggest cousin.
We're going under.
We're going under. I don't want you to end up as a dead Mamma Jamma or something like that?
Yeah. Oh man, we got to do an Office series. But no, like the first prime minister, like earlier in the movie, when right before Godzilla comes on land, and it's a possibility that early version of Godzilla will come on land, but they're like, it's not likely. Don't say that it won't come on land though. And his intention is to comfort his people. there's nothing wrong with that. But then right after, like, just that split second of like, he's like, there's no way this thing's coming on land. It cuts to like someone telling him it's come on land. Yeah. He's like,
literally
what?
Right after. Yeah.
And
didn't somebody in the meeting say, hey, don't say anything that we don't know for sure?
Well, right after they were like, you shouldn't have said that. But then he's still like, I need to, like, the people need comfort. The people need reassurance, like, because they're panicking right now. Like,
yeah, they should be.
Exactly. No, they should be panicking. But I also really appreciated that because it's like, yeah, they're showing he made a mistake, but they're also humanizing him because his intention was like really pure. It wasn't to lie to the people. It wasn't like, no, trust your government. It's just like, you're scared. I'm trying to provide you comfort.
Yeah, that is something that like, often you don't necessarily see in like Western films where, there was no real like bad guy. Like even the people who were you could blame for something or who maybe at fault weren't bad people. They were literally like you could totally understand and give the benefit of the doubt and not blame him for doing that. But at the same time, it's like I get it. Yeah, I totally get it. But you know, they need to be evacuating. They should not necessarily be panicking. Maybe they should be evacuating in a non-panicking way. But they shouldn't just be like everything's dope. Because it's not, dude. You need to get out of there.
Yeah. No. And something I appreciated with him is they did show him like being like, let's evacuate. And you had other people in the cabinets rightfully being like, look at like, okay, are we jumping the gun here? Like this is really negatively impacting our country. And it would be so easy. Like Western movies would just jump on that. There was like the finance people just being like, okay, but like we might need to exterminate. Like look at like let's logically look at like how this has impacted the airport, the tunnel, like all these financial things that we need for our country. Mm-hmm. In a Western movie, or I'll argue in a lesser movie, it would probably jump on to that like, no, greedy money like that. But it didn't. It still kept them human. Like they were still on board. And with the prime minister, they also showed him when Godzilla was coming in and he was romping around the first time, he was about to approve the defense force attacking, but then it's like there were two people and he's like, no, call it off. Nobody could get hurt. I'm like, that was awesome. That's really cool because you can also go down the discussion of like that could have ended the movie there.
I know, dude. When that happened, that was like I think the first and only time I spoke out loud to the movie. I'm like, nope. That shouldn't have mattered, man. I was like, that it's not relevant. You know how many people are going to die anyway? Like, you care about these two fishermen or whatever? Like, it literally doesn't matter, dude.
It was a parent with their children running across the train track.
No. I thought it was an elderly couple. That's what because I remember the scene now. I thought it was, but either way, it really doesn't matter, dude. Because like the decision is like, it's like okay, you know, if we shoot like. They're probably going to die. How many people died already?
Well, I appreciated it because they also had evacuated. Like,
yeah. But like, you're not going to get everybody, right? And no matter what you do to stop this thing, people are going to die. They're going to die if you don't stop it. They're going to die if you try to stop it. Doesn't matter which way you try to do it. They're going to die, right? So saving these two old people right now, it doesn't matter. Like I get like but like I think that in a way it did start to show like okay, you can be irresponsible, right? Like you can sort of adhere too much to your values. Like there's some like there's a diminishing return eventually, right? Sometimes you have to be pragmatic, right? Like you have to make these hard decisions.
And that's something I appreciate about this movie because I think it organically brings up a good way to have these conversations. It would have been so easy to make the prime minister someone overly preachy, but he wasn't. And it would have been so easy to make so many of the other characters just like, nah, screw them. We're concerned about the infrastructure and all that.
Oh, you know what I liked? Where like, yeah, because in the American movie, they would have like really, really hit home how like inept and incompetent he was for the decisions made. And then you know that scene where like he and like basically everybody else die in the helicopter? They would have like focused, they would have really been like, hey guys, hey, you're really gonna enjoy this. Here's some justice P for you, right? And they would just like he'd be like, ah, and then the tail would hit the helicopter and it would be like, yeah, the guy who sucked died. And it's like in this movie, it was so like I was like, wait a minute. wait, wasn't the prime minister on that helicopter? And
Yeah.
I had to like think about it after, and like they didn't shove it down your throat. They didn't like, it was just sort of inconsequential. It's like, yeah, the helicopter got blown up. We need a new PM, right? And I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah, because in the U.S. one, like in the Western one, they really would have focused. Like he would have been like, here's your heel, here's your foil, here's the guy to hate, right? Yeah.
And I appreciated like they so many people in this movie. I'm just like, yes, I'm watching fictional characters, but I feel like I'm watching people, like actual people you can see, and then like they people towards the end I found like all right, people are dying in this indiscriminately, and it's not celebrating that, and that also adds to the impact of when someone dies on screen, when destruction happens on screen. You're like, oh dang, like these people were like, in the case of that cabinet, the prime minister should have left earlier, but he's like, I can't leave while all these people in my country are here. Like this is happening. I have to stay for them. Like, what does that say about me to them? But also like, what message does that send to them? Like, hey, I'm going to peace out. You're worthless. Die. Peace. Like, and then his cabinet members are like, no, you have a responsibility to outside of just this city. And it's just so interesting because it looks at things I found an earnest, honest, and objective way. And I think that's what I appreciate about this movie the most. And then also Godzilla being so different, but still so Godzilla that, oh man, just fascinating.
Yeah, like when he didn't like, I didn't know if that was gonna like when he didn't want to leave. I didn't know if that was going to be like a commentary on like duty and honor and stuff like that, which seemed to be pretty relevant to Japanese culture. They seemed to be like a prominent sort of thing, like shame and pride and duty seem to be very important things, right? So I didn't know if they were going to like try and hammer home some sort of message there. I think like, yeah, they did the best job they could in remaining like impartial or just giving you like every side of the story while still bringing, but still framing those situations or presenting them to you, right? Oh crap! So there's a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, it's very, very different than like a Western film, and it almost seemed like there's a lot of ways where it was like they were weirdly focused on the bureaucracy, like preoccupied with it. I would say I'd be like, okay, let's can I see more of Godzilla, please? I would like more of that, right? And no, it's funny. I was thinking about like when you think of like a Western film and you think of like a city being destroyed, like buildings falling and stuff. You can just like you would always like I can see in my mind like just people falling out of them and stuff, right? Like the CG people being like just total madness, right? It is just really interesting to watch, like how doesn't that seem to be a common theme where like in most Godzilla movies, people are like evacuated from the cities, like
they do that a lot. There's only
well, it makes sense. That is what would happen, but like are there any movies where Godzilla gets there before they can evacuate?
The original, and I'll even say this one, because even though this one shows people evacuating, it also shows like packed highways. People are dying. And then
I mean, to be fair, like it just showed like a lot of cars, that were left there.
Well, I mean, and they did mention a death toll afterwards. Like it did.
But they also mentioned how many people got out to the like millions of people successfully evacuated. Right? So
which that's something I did appreciate, but the one that probably had it the most, I'd say, was the original, because the original was also like really focusing on the Hiroshima and
Nagasaki. It was super close to the original allegory upon which the whole thing was based, right? So like, it's going to be very like the most simple, very like least nuanced take on the allegory, I guess.
Now this one, like, it's interesting that you brought up the bureaucracy point, because I think my original watching, like partway through, I was like, wow, okay, we're really focused on this, and we're introducing so many characters that are dying off, and it's hard to keep track. But then I'm like, okay, that actually did serve a purpose, because it was trying to make that statement about government. But then also, in a way, much like the original, I really appreciated that take with that time with all the bureaucracy and all that stuff. Because one, it makes you really want to see Godzilla more, which is always a good thing. But then also, when you're looking at, like, the intention was, like, the guy just like, look, I love this franchise and I love it where it's movies, where it's Godzilla plenty. And the whole point is him rock'em sock'em roboting with another monster. But I don't want to just do that. Like, I want there to be, like, a thing. And with him, it was, again, like, more so looking at the slow response due to how things were set up with the government, with the Fukushima disaster, with the tsunami and the earthquake that Japan had experienced. And it would lose that impact, at least for me, if we didn't have that time. Like, you probably could do it shorter, but for me, I was like, it's nailing down that point of that confusion.
Yeah, if we're talking about runtime. Holy crap! Runtime was like they definitely could have trimmed some fat there for sure. I would have liked to have not had to woken up so early to watch
it. Your take on runtime could have been also like the time you got up or the lack of sleep. I know, like, the more I've watched it, I don't find it lags. I'm just like, it's a smooth sailing. Like, the story shifts gears. Absolutely, but I enjoy the gear it's in for the first one because that first gear serves a purpose. And then when we get to the second gear, I'm like, okay, this is also very enjoyable, but I might not enjoy it as much if we didn't have that first gear. But also, that's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, if you think that the initial focus on the bureaucracy, like, okay, we're setting up this thing, but we're going to move into more, like, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, interesting territory later on. It's like, oh, no, this is like this is the chunk of the plot here. And I'm wondering, like, it's interesting because, like, Godzilla is a concept. I mean, you can do it three ways, right? You can look at it from, you can do sort of you're following a family or civilians and the way that they make their way out of the city or the way they experience it. Not like all civilians, but just like a particular character, right? Or
like the 2014 approach with the main dude.
Yeah, or Matthew
King of the
Broderick
Monsters, when it's focused on
like the 98 Godzilla, like that. Like, that's sort of what I'm thinking, right? Like, not in terms of like portraying Godzilla that way, but the way they focus on Broderick and those characters, right?
It's like through their viewpoint.
Yes. So you can do it like that. You can do it like the way they did it, with like it's just like the bureaucracy of it and how the government handles it. And I think the other way is to do it like Godzilla versus Kong, right? Where it's just a movie about two monsters messing each other up. And what I would like to, it's pretty cool. I mean, especially if you think Godzilla is like dope, right? And you're all about what Godzilla is. And I can definitely see like really, really digging that. What I would like to see, and it's obviously not completely original, but I would like to see like a Cloverfield-esque version of Godzilla where you don't follow one person's take of the thing the whole time, but it's just the only dialogue you get really is from either people like screaming at each other, but you don't get to know what, you don't follow it. You don't get context beyond the things they're saying to each other. I think the news reports would be the most, it's mostly news reports and stuff like that, right? Or you'll hear like orders over I want it to be all completely like found footage, so you're seeing it through cell phones, through news reports, through things like that. Like, it's all like someone is filming it, but you don't focus on any one character. You don't get anything beyond what you would get as a person in the world. Potentially,
interesting.
So if you can hear radio broadcast, or if you can see that's the information you'll get. So because I think it would be so visceral to see, all of a sudden you have a phone view through like a high rise of Godzilla just like coming through the building across, like, and just pure destruction type of thing. And then it cuts to another, like maybe a helicopter view, a news helicopter. Like, just, I want it to be very visceral, very real, very like scare me, make me feel like I would if I were there. Right. You
know what? I would be on board with that movie in a heartbeat. And then I'd also be up for like I don't want to say midquel, but the one from the other side where you're seeing it from the perspective of the people who are in the know and trying to catch up with it and address it from that side. That'd be fascinating. Like this one, even though like, yeah, you had some main players, like I wouldn't say like this is looking at it from the personal viewpoint of X, Y, and Z. I'm like, this is more of in a way, like a Japanese societal look. Because it is looking at it from the government's perspective, but it's also like multiple people within the government. And then, yes, it's shortened down to that task force who are like, look, there is no red tape. Just speak freely. We're not worried about hierarchy or seniority here. We'll hash everything out. The best idea wins, kind of thing. Like it did get to their viewpoint, but it was looking at it from other people who were peripherally attached to them, like their viewpoint. It wasn't just like, hey, we're following this one character. But that idea where it's just like a monster attack where you don't have all the context, you don't have all the know-how, and it's just everything's happening, like, sounds awesome to me. Give me that in spades.
Yeah, like someone just came in afterwards and got as much footage from as many different sources as they could, and like just it's almost like a documentary, but there's no dialogue. There's no you're just watching it happen, right? And it's almost as if you were just some sort of entity that watches Earth, right? And you just see, you could even have satellite footage of like the destruction caused, stuff like that. Like it could just cut to all these different, like, oh, Chris, I think we could make a really good movie.
or heck, I'll take it a step back. You could do it like a couple of years later, where someone's just like a film school student who's like, hey, this is somehow like, this is what media can do. And when you're just responding in the now, when you don't have all the stuff, and I've collected all this footage, like that could be interesting, where it's like, here's how we can get story as it happens without all the context, without everything, where it's just, this is happening now, and people immediately reacting to what's happening in front of them as it happens, without the knowledge of the why or where or what. Like, what's happening? A monster is here. Why? Nobody knows. Just run, dude, run.
Yeah, man. Honestly, like what do you? I don't want to talk about Cloverfield, but I would love to talk about Cloverfield because I like it a lot more than like most people seem to like it. I think a lot of people seem to it was hacky. I'm like, no, dude, that was dope. Like, it was a dope movie. I
like Cloverfield. I like what it could have done. I don't think it did as much with what it was setting up with what it could have done. Because Cloverfield also unfortunately came out towards that time where found footage was like just really pissing everybody off. Like eventually it got more accepted in like the horror movies of like some of the ones we were talking about earlier, like before we recorded, but found footage and shaky cam and all that was stuff that was increasingly happening in so many movies. It was
Blair Witch was the first one, but I'm pretty sure Cloverfield was like the second movie of ever to do that.
No. There were other movies that were using that approach. It was the one that was using it the most since Blair Witch, but there have been like Blair Witch 2 and 3 and other movies started.
But like, I mean, obviously, because that's the Blair Witch thing, right?
Yeah.
But like, I think like, because to me, I remember it being like, I'm like, I haven't, like, the only other movie I've seen like this of found footage is Blair Witch. I hadn't, like, in my memory now, I had no knowledge of literally any other movie that had done that. And I feel like that was where like sort of the bulk of the criticism came from, because and I just felt like that they paved the way, like they did it, and then a whole bunch of other movies did it afterwards. Was that not the case? Like, am I missing?
I think a common criticism that goes towards like the found footage thing is something that other movies other hugely successful franchise movies were using, but not found footage. But with found footage, a lot of the stuff is like, oh, hey, it's just this random person filming on their phone and all that. So when they run, the camera gets blurry, the screen gets shaky and all that.
Yeah, that was the drama I heard. Yeah. Because to me, I was like, dude, I I mean, obviously, like, okay, here's the thing, Chris. As I'm watching it, like, I don't get motion sickness. I don't have a problem with that. So, like, that wasn't an issue for me. But I didn't think about that till afterwards, where people are like, hey, it was too shaky. And my first reaction is like, it wasn't too shaky, because I didn't think that. And then when I look back on it, like, when I watched it again, I'm like, you know what? It could have stood to be less shaky, but obviously that's going to be part of it. Like, obviously it's going to be shaky, right? So, but, I mean, you can make the argument that in Cloverfield, there was a little too much.
So I think Cloverfield was a victim of its own timing, also because like other franchises, and as much as I love it, I'll point at like Chris Nolan's The Dark Knight franchise as a prime example of this. But then also you had like Transformers and basically any other action movie or so many other franchises. When it was time for an action scene, it would be like, let's zoom in, let's do the cut. So you're not getting wider frame shots. You're not seeing everything that's going on. And people were just like, so many people were tired of that.
Oh, I hated that, Chris. I hate it so much.
Oh, no, I'm with you. But then Cloverfield, that contextually makes sense within Cloverfield because you're following people who are just filming. But because it's just like, a bunch of random dudes running around just being like, all right, let's record this as this happens. Of course, they're not going to pause and turn the camera and you're going to cinematically see this monster like smacking the head off of the Statue of Liberty or knocking down a building.
That scene was dope, though.
It was.
That was so good.
So many people, I think, if Cloverfield had came out like 3 years later, I think that criticism would not have hit as much. It would have been looked at, I think, a little more contextually at the time. But because so many movies were doing the shaky cam when it didn't make sense, it's just like, hey, we can do this. And it's intense and you're right in the fight. Whereas I want to see the fight. I don't care. If you're just cutting to some random elbow, like, no, I want to see them throw down.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I hate, I there's for decades, I would say I'm old enough where I can actually say that now. Decades. We've
been alive for almost 3.5 of them. That bonkers.
So, there's no action movie I can think of off the top of my head where I'm like literally every action movie, like it's all the action scenes are ruined because I'm like, what's happening? I can't follow it at all. Why would anyone make this? Why would anybody on earth think that like this is like good or watchable or coherent or like dude, Chris, like, believe me, I am on the same page. But like in terms of, and I'm not saying you're making this argument, but like anyone who would make the argument that you presented, right? That like that, you know, I really wanted to see it hit the head off the statue. Okay, so I would make this argument. While it wasn't insanely shaky, it would focus on the moments wherein you needed it to focus. And to be fair, if you were watching found footage online, right, you wouldn't be like,
no, absolutely.
You didn't frame it right. You didn't, because that was the whole concept of the movie, right? You would just be like in awe, like that. You're just you wouldn't be complaining that it wasn't in frame right. You would be completely like hand over mouth. What is happening? Is this thing going to like destroy the country, right? So that's sort of like what you're supposed to be feeling. You're supposed to just be like.
So I'll also say absolutely yes to all of that. However, I think. I'm trying to add context to the why. You said you don't get why. I'm adding some of the why.
I get why. I just think
just general fatigue to the stuff. But also, one of the things I loved about Cloverfield was its marketing campaign. I still remember the first teaser trailer because I think we were at the movies with Mike and we all saw it together, and all you had was just this random party, and you're like, okay, what is this? You're just like, all right, and then out of nowhere, it's just the Statue of Liberty's head bouncing down the street, and you're like, what? And you had no idea what it was.
I can't remember a time before or after that I've been so hooked by a marketing gimmick. Like which was so outstanding, and I think to a degree it might have worked against it. Only because too much
hype? Not necessarily, because I mean, like, look at how much hype The Dark Knight had. That was guerrilla marketing to an umpteenth degree, and it worked. But because it's a monster movie, and so many, like, basically every big blockbuster monster movie, you get the wide shots, you get this, you're following that. once you learn it's a monster movie, you're thinking like, oh, okay, it's going to shift from that, and it never did. So
I honestly,
I know.
Dude, I mean, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, I could. I
think that's the general audience disconnect. Like once you find out, it's a giant monster movie, you're like, okay, they're doing this great tease to hook us, but then it's going to be this, and it's like, no, and it's still staying as that.
Okay.
This trailer and teaser is exactly what you're going to get. You're going to be confused. You're going to not know what's going on. It's going to be awesome.
They expected a gimmick.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They got what the movie was.
That's my interpretation of what happened. Because when I read the reactions of why was it like this? It's like, nowhere did it say it wouldn't be like this. But then I'm like, okay, wider scope. When I think big monster movies, it's always what you always get. A lot of the monster. You get the wide shots. You get like all that. Cloverfield, you see the Clover, the monster, for maybe 10 seconds. 10 to 20 seconds total. Yeah. That's it.
It blew my mind as a concept. I was blown away. I'm like, this is perfect. I want I was hooked immediately because I'm like, I just saw all the possibilities. I saw how cool it could have been, how original it was.
Yeah.
It was, they did I don't know, man. I can't to me, I don't. Man, if you don't if someone says to me that, I'm like, oh, okay, now I know I don't have to listen to things you say about anything. I can just write you off. No, because it's like, dude, it's.
That's something I'm like, don't do that. But I remind myself not to do that. But with me, it's like anytime someone tries to tell me oh, White Chicks is a good movie worth watching, I'm like, I am actively trying to remind myself that no, I'm not going to write you off right now.
You're basic, okay? I'm out. You're basic. Get out my face.
That's something. It's just like, all right, art is subjective. Gotta remind myself.
Is it? I'm pretty sure there's rules.
But then,
can you paint on a canvas by building a car? No, that doesn't make any sense. So clearly there are rules to art.
That's
no. I
mean, that's also very different.
I mean, no. It's the same. It's the same. Okay, so it's like people are saying I'd go online and I'll look at people who are trying to give advice for people who are trying to get into audio engineering, and they're like, there are no rules. It's like, okay, well then I will shove the microphone up my butt and fart into it, and that will create a song as good as any Beatles song. Of course there are rules, idiot. You can't say there are no rules.
But that's also looking at a discipline of an aspect of art. When you're talking about art generally, hey, I'm going to make a movie. Am I going to go try to technically make it as good as possible? 100%. Are there rules and guidelines to do that? 1,000%. But is someone's interpretation of it going to be different than my interpretation of it? Absolutely. And that's where I'm meaning art is subjective. And that's where there aren't necessarily any rules. My reading of a movie is going to be different than yours.
Yes. I would say that, you could make, dude, there's some movies out there that are pretty messed up. What if Hitler made a movie, about all the stuff that he believed and it was cool. And it's
didn't he?
I guess I don't know, did he? I assume people there's a whole bunch of propaganda films.
I think there was a movie made by Hitler or by someone close to him, and it was all propaganda stuff and all that. And then it's something that's been interestingly brought up where someone's like, I'm never going to say this is a good movie because it's not. Yeah. Were some of the technical principles applied? Yes. Absolutely, and that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I guess art is subjective in a way, but I think if you're going to get into that of literally anything could be considered good by any given person, it's okay, well, I mean, that's sort of the case before we created society, right? I could be of the mind that everyone should be subservient to me and obey what I think and say, and that any society that isn't built in that manner is actually immoral and not you know what I mean? If we're going to break down art to that, then we might as well not art could be literally anything whatsoever, right? I mean, you can make that argument for anything on earth. There's so many things that we agree upon. This is the case. This is what's right. This is what's wrong. This is how we should do things. This is how we shouldn't do things. And a lot of them there's a lot of stuff that's arbitrarily decided, but everyone seems to have come to a consensus, right? So I think there's an argument to be made there where, I mean, I guess technically, yes, anything could be art, but I think we should probably have discussions and try and decide, like try and come to a consensus, a reasonable consensus as to what should constitute art and what probably shouldn't, right? So like when people say things like I don't know, dude. I don't know. I think there's good art. Like I think there's good art and bad art, right? And I don't think it's subjective. I don't. I think there's an objective measure of what constitutes good art and bad art. And I think we could agree. I think most people can agree on those objective measures, right? Like I really do.
Well, no, and I get where you're coming from, and I'll say I agree where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to say what somewhat like at the end of the day with a movie, like films are art. Period. Like to me, films are art. What is that art trying to accomplish? Then I'll get into the subjectivity of it, and that kind of thing. But like I'll enjoy something where I'm like, look, this is just light fluff. I'm not going to compare it to like something highbrow. Yeah. It doesn't line up. We're not talking like if I'm talking Fast and the Furious, I'm like, look, I'm not going to compare this to Schindler's List.
Yeah, I don't consider that art per se. Like I consider that a movie. You know what I mean? Like here's the thing.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like I think
and this could be its own podcast in itself. We're getting into the weeds here.
Nothing to do with Godzilla.
Well, but it does, because Godzilla is a franchise that does both of those things. Like it is a franchise where it'll be like this exploration, a meditation on like the horrors that a country has gone through after it's been bombed or after it just had very bad like natural disasters back to back. But it'll also be like, let's have fun putting dudes in suits, fighting other dudes in suits and knocking over awesome model towns and stuff. Like it's interesting because one is, I'll be like, it's higher brow art, or it's more intense art. Or you could say more valid art, but the principles, like mechanically, they're making the movies the same. They're going through the same process. It's still someone expressing their creativity out on the page, an actor like using their talent to artistically promote it. It's like a lot of the principles are the same, but it's also its goal is very different.
Yeah, I think there's a disparity between, like, I think a disparity can be so broad so as to sort of invalidate a blanket definition, right? I think a good example might be, like, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Bo Burnham's Inside. No,
not yet.
Wherein it's a comedy special, but, like, it is so poignant and so thoughtful and meaningful, and there's so much allegory packed into it that like there's so many different things at play and there's so much context and nuance that it should not be defined as a quote unquote comedy special. Like if it's going to be, it basically turns everything that came before it invalidates it, right? It basically says, if you were going to define this as a comedy special, you can no longer define what was previously defined as a comedy special. It changes the game in such a manner so as to prevent the game from being played in the same way, right? Like so to me, it's like, I feel kind of stupid calling it a comedy special, given everything that it achieves artistically or philosophically or emotionally compared to other comedy specials. So I think there's like, you can say, obviously, we're going to call a child's drawing art, and we would call the Mona Lisa art. But I mean, I think the disparity is so large that maybe we need different definitions, right? or at least like not considering one art and considering the other art, I think is completely valid perspective to have.
I'm torn on that. I think it's
because they're both paintings, right? I would be fine with saying yes, they are both paintings, but are they both art? No, I would not say. I mean, like if art is taking something and like art, because like art can be so broad so as to be a meaningless definition, right?
And that's there's the catch-22 with that. I think if you can, it's iffy because I don't like necessarily adding like so many labels, because then it's like
or
everything's labeled or gatekeeping it. But if you add so many labels can be helpful, but they can also get to the like pointless where like, all right, what is this? Like, oh, we're post grunge emo core this, where it's like, what?
Yeah. I've never known how to define my music ever, dude. It's constantly changing.
But then it's like, I'm not. Beatles to me is a very interesting example. I'm not going to look at the Beatles and be like, look, I want to hold your hand. Like, you're not artists when you wrote this song. Of course, I'm going to look at Revolver and Rubber Soul as like deeper explorations of themes and meaning and all that, and that are very different than I want to hold your hand. But I'm not going to be like, that's not art. It's art, but it's not going for what the other thing's going for. So if we can come up with that definition or that label being like, okay, what's the aim of this art? Because mechanically we're doing the exact same thing. Like, it's still someone applying their talent. It's still someone doing this. It's still someone creatively putting out something. Is it as creative or as deep as like a day in the life? No, but it's absolutely different. But mechanically, it's similar. And it's still a creative endeavor, which would be art.
I suppose, if that's how you would like to define it. I would make the argument that, like, I think a lot of people's, like, if you look at it like that, you're sort of limited by what knowledge you have in terms of, like, songwriting or the history of pop music up to that point.
Okay.
And what's really occurring in I Want to Hold Your Hand, like, they could not have written anything on Revolver without having to write I Want to Hold Your Hand first. I think every year they basically were their own Beatles. You know what I mean? Where people are like, oh, this never would have happened to the Beatles. Well, whatever the Beatles wrote in 1963 would have never happened to what the Beatles wrote in 1962. And it's not because it's true, man. They were like, every year they were a musical revolution. When you look at pop music or Western music, before the Beatles, they literally invented modern music. They literally invented, like, it was basically like you had classical music, then you had big bands, which are basically like a faster, a little more contemporary, classical music. Then you had blues, but it wasn't really as popular as it could have been. And then you had the Beatles and I've watched several documentaries on this, where they basically took like all of popular music up until them and synthesized it. Right. And so, when you look at, I guess like for me, yes. Okay. So a cave painting, yes, that's technically art given the mental faculties they had at the time. Right. But now I would be like, I don't know, compared to the Mona Lisa, that's just like a caveman doodling on a wall, right? Like, that's literally what it is.
No, and I get that entirely. Yeah. I get where you're coming from with that.
Functionally, I will always I will say that is art. I will say a child's drawing is art. I will say, because I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to have this conversation with literally everybody who wants to define things that I don't necessarily consider art as art, right? Like, obviously you're going to have to like make concessions, but I mean, I don't think I can make an objective argument for it, especially from the sense of like from a utilitarian sense. Like, it doesn't make sense to do that. I just think, like, philosophically, to me, given, like I said, the disparity between like what it would take to make A compared to B, it doesn't seem like it's the same thing, even though on the outside it seems like it's the same thing, right?
That's fair. I also think with a lot of art, but to shape this back to Godzilla, it also does aim for what is the intention? Like, what's the plan? Like, if you're trying if this movie, I'd be like, I'll say like highbrow, or I'll categorize it as like, it's film with a capital F, because like it was a deeply personal story about a nation, and looking at it, like what the director felt was, it's honest inaccuracies, and it's exploring it through this avenue of a giant monster. And that's crazy interesting. And then you also get very beautiful artistic moments where like everything's dialed up to 11. And I'm talking about in particular the atomic breath scene. That to me, I'm like, that is like one of my favorite scenes in film, period, because it's also like everything that they're like, the emotion they're trying to convey, the visual effects, the music, like everything is syncing up perfectly for me. Like, I am impacted, but that's also what it's trying to do. It's trying to make you feel what's going on, and it succeeds.
Yes.
And that's where I'm like, it's trying to convey an emotion, and it is succeeding 1,000%. When I look at, say, like a Godzilla versus Kong, it too is trying to convey something, but it's also like, let's have fun with this absurdity, and let's take you on that ride, and let's get you jumping up and cheering as a giant ape like is jumping off of like ping-ponging off of buildings, avoiding this atomic breath to punch this giant lizard in the face. Like, it's instilling this joy, and that's where I'm like, it's still making me feel something. It's still art, and it's accomplishing that. It's not trying to do it to the degree of a Shin Godzilla, and like, both accomplish what they set out to do. Shin Godzilla, it just accomplishes it in a very different way, but it's also trying something different. Like,
yeah. I think like, I mean, it shouldn't, like, the metric shouldn't be so specific.
Yeah,
so
no.
But I think, like,
with this franchise in particular, it's like, look, there's room for both.
Yes.
I might not like
sure.
both as much. Like, I might enjoy this one more for X, Y, and Z, but this is also just as much as this franchise.
Oh yeah, like, I'm not going to like, because if they're achieving their intention, right, which is, I assume with Godzilla is going to be fun and make money and not be so ridiculous so as to just, to put people off, right? And I think, like, okay, like, the one thing I want to say is that not all intentions are equal, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think they're, okay, so I mean, we could probably agree on that, right?
Yeah.
And I think also there's a part wherein, like, it sort of, like, not everyone is capable of appreciating things in the same way or to the same depth or degree as, like, others. Sometimes it could be a matter of like education, intelligence, ignorance, just the things you've been exposed to, the things you've experienced, as opposed to other people. Like, they could just not have experienced the same thing, so they could not see things the same way you have, right?
There's also going to be people who just, like, simply it's not their taste.
No, it's not their taste.
Yeah, like, well, it's like earlier, as we were talking about the movie, we were talking about the differences, like how they present the politics there, or how we do it in Western stuff. And like, if you were like, I didn't enjoy that aspect because I found it, like, dragging and all that, I'm like, you know what? That's a valid take. I get where you're coming from. I didn't feel that because of X, Y, and Z. But even if you know that, that's not necessarily going to mean that you're going to fully enjoy it. Like,
because, like,
at the end of the day, some things just aren't for you or aren't for me.
Like, in turn, like, to speak to that, like, when I'm watching it, I'm like, okay, like, you made your point. Yeah. Right? Like, if I've already gotten your point and you're still continuing on making the same point, I'm going to sit here and start to get bored, right? Yeah. So, like, I've noticed that with me, honestly, dude, and I don't know, it might be, like, sort of like ADD-ish or whatever, but to me, like, when I get the point the movie's trying to make, like, with a scene or I'm like, okay, move on. Like, you don't, like, that you made it. And now other people may not get that point. They might need more. As soon as I get it, I'm like, okay, cool, we move on, right? And so, like, there are movies that don't do that, and, like, I don't know if that's, like, a feeling on my part where, like, I'm not necessarily, like, if, like, because you said, like, when you make a movie, if it needs to make money, right? If there's that profit incentive motive and it's not just to make art, then you're going to need to make concessions, right? You're going to need to appeal to people. You're going, like, to a certain degree, right? It's like, obviously, like, you're not going to, if your studio's giving you money to make a film, you're not going to go make, David Cronenberg's Godzilla, right? You're not going to make, like, the Eraserhead of Godzilla movies, because, like, they wouldn't make any sense. It'd be a total flop, right?
Well, it's and I also think, like, it's interesting, and I think this movie is a good example of it in and of itself. Like, I can get that, where it's like, you're like, all right, you've made your point. I don't need you to keep going back to it. I didn't feel like they were beating me over the head. Like, even though I got the point they were trying to make, I still felt like, okay, we're still adding some additional points. Like, one of my favorite spots from that early chunk of the movie is when they brought in the scientists. And it ended up being like, the joke was just like, that was a pointless waste of time.
Oh yeah, they told you literally everything that, like, they already knew, or you could just see by looking at it, or like.
But then to me, I'm like, there's a step further here. You like, I took it as like a step further of we're at a point where cross-culturally, it's almost like we're afraid to say anything. Like, not to get into this, the like people droning on and on about cancel culture, but the similarity of like, if I say something wrong and it's proven wrong, like that's going to be pinned on me and I'm not going to be able to find work. I'm not going to be able to do this. And it's like, look, right now we need as many theories as possible. I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah. So but even bringing up that, I was like, I love that you're still focusing on like all the red tape and all that, but you're still bringing up all these interesting sub points or showing different ways where you're like, really, we got to do this? Like when we got to the fun SDF stuff, when Godzilla was coming back and looking like the Shin Godzilla for the rest of the movie, like it's the military person talking to the next military person, who then talks to a third person, who then has to talk to a guy in the room, who then has to talk to the woman next to him because she's the head. Then she has to repeat the same stuff to the guy. It's like, I'm pretty sure he's heard it 5 times now. But it's like, we have to do it this way, where I'm like, interesting. Well, why?
Well, because that's actually, I mean, to speak to that, that is actually a component of like Japanese society, right? Like, I remember reading. I know you know that. I remember reading just to say that because like to introduce the premise. But I was reading about how they actually had to Japanese airlines. They actually had to adopt the manner in which Western airline, like the pilots and co-pilots, talk to each other because there was so much cultural like BS in terms of like hierarchy and communicating with that people like planes were crashing because they were not able to speak their minds, right? Yeah. So people were dying because of it. And so they had to streamline. They had to like every other part of our culture, this is cool to have it in there. But in terms of like flying this plane, we need to, we actually need to talk to each other the way that Americans talk to each other, right? And so I think like that, obviously like that was, but again, like I know that about Japan. Like Japanese people know that about Japan, but not I don't need that beaten. I don't need to be beaten over the head with that. See, so, I was gonna say like that's just something, but like most people don't know that, right? Most people like that, but to be fair, and also they didn't actually. And again, this isn't, I assume, made necessarily for Western audiences because it was all Japanese people and it was spoken in Japanese, right? So. I mean, Japanese people are going to watch it and be like, oh, yeah, definitely. That's an issue. We probably should be doing something about that, right? I don't like that about our culture. But in terms of like someone, like a Westerner who's like, oh, yeah, I know that about Japanese culture. It's like, I don't like, it's weird to me in a way. I think it's almost just like, okay, I understand that. You're not teaching me anything new. You're like sort of, but for them, I assume it's like, it's such like a, like, I assume it'd be like the equivalent of me watching a movie and watching police brutality or the way like the government handles First Nations, like our government specifically, or things like that, right? Where I'd be like, yes, that is an issue. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, I identify with it. Yes, but as a Westerner, just like, okay, I get it. But man,
sorry.
No, it's because I've been really like, I've been thinking a lot about, like, I really want to, I've been watching movies recently with like, because I'm really starting to understand like what makes a good movie in a lot of ways, right? Or what makes a bad movie, I guess, more importantly. And there's certain things where I'm like, oh, you could curtail this, or you should come at it from this angle because this would be more interesting and it would provide more possibilities down the line. You know what I mean? Like there's little things where I'm like, you could just change it this way, change it that way, change the tone, change little tricks, little different decisions, and it really makes you realize how many little decisions add up to make the movie that you're watching, right? And how difficult it is to really get everybody on the exact same page and coordinate all of it. And there's so many different opinions happening. There's so many different perspectives. It's just, sorry.
And then even within that, like, you could look at the difficulty of where other studios or other places see like, oh, this is working. So let's turn that into the machine. And then the author is starting to lose their voice. Because as much like I agree with you, I'll look at things. I'm not going to open up the obvious kettle of fish, but I'll look at I'll use the example of Godzilla of 2014. I really, really dig that movie, and I dig the choices that they made. But there's stuff where I'm looking at, I'm like, oh, if you did, if you cut this, you could, like, this could have been better. If you presented it through this way, it could have been better. But also, Like, that's very much like what, say, Gareth Edwards, how he wanted to present his story. Or if there was interference, being like, no, we have to do it this way because of X, Y, and Z, like, technically this, budgetary this, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be like, hey, my vision right, your vision wrong. But it's going to be, like, it's interesting, is what I'm saying. I get 1,000% where you're coming from, because you're like, this could factually make the movie better, but it also might be like the person making it or creating it might be like, but I want to make what I want to make, and I want to have that sense of ownership of it. So it can be this interesting, tricky line. Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
I get where you're coming from, though.
A studio shouldn't be like, let's copy what they did right. The studio should be like, let's not do what they did wrong. Right. And I think more often than not, the lesson seems to be repeatedly, or at least I've been watching this happen over and over again my entire life, is that they hire someone because, like, hey, you have a really good idea, you have your original, you have skills, we want you to make this movie, and then they destroy it. So it's like, why would you come to this person? Why would you hire me? Why did you hire me? If you're just going to come in and change everything I want to do, right? It's kind of like you could have just made your own movie. You could have just bought the idea off me and made it however you wanted to make it. And I think that's like a lot of the issues where, like, studios are getting in their own way, and it seems to be, it just seems to be hubris, because
it's this whole thing of like art through business. It's always been this tricky thing.
Yeah, it's almost like, hey, we should rely on health insurance companies for our healthcare, even though they have literally exact opposite, diametrically opposed incentive. Their whole their incentive is to go against their entire purpose, which is like, it's like, hey, what's the most immoral, dumbest, nonsensical, unpragmatic way you can, frame this or construct it? And I think it's the same thing. Like, you shouldn't be making art for money. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
it's counter.
But then but then it's also the tricky thing of like, hey, we're a business and we're sinking our money in this. We want to get this back, and it's tricky. It shouldn't be, but that's something where I love something like this movie, where one, like this movie was made on a much smaller budget, and I'd argue it comes off better because of it. Like, at points before we started recording, we were talking about like some of the special effects. Like, I'm not going to lie and say like, hey, this is special effects wise, this is as great as, say, Jurassic Park, because Jurassic Park to me is like, that is still the best use of special effects in modern cinema, period, because like it was applying over like practical effects. And yes, there's stuff you can't do with practical props and effects where you need just special effects, but I'll argue that Shin Godzilla uses its limited budget and its, like, at points limited special effects much better than movies that have all the budget for all the special effects. Like, not to pick on the prequels, but the special effects in those show, or certain sections of Black Widow, a movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. Like, there's sections where you're like, ooh, like, did we need all those explosions? Or where I can clearly tell what is not seamlessly transitioning from CG ScarJo swinging down into something into actual ScarJo propping through the thing. At points you were like, with Shin Godzilla, I'm like, okay, what I'm looking at now is a special effect of like an animatronic special effect. It's a dude just like with the dots and all that. But if you were going to tell me like this was a guy in a suit performing that, I would believe you. Like, I'm not just looking at this as like, oh, this is clearly a CGI thing. It blends its special effects with its sights so well that it works. The only time for me where I'm like, this is 1,000% clearly special effects, aside from like the atomic breath, because of course, is like at the beginning when the gilled fish kind of Godzilla thing is coming on land and is pushing all the boats and the cars, where you're like, all right, this is effective, but you also know, like, all right, I'm not looking at practical effects. This is clearly CGI. But within the context of what it was, you're like, I'm down with that. It's necessary for this spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it all depends on where you want to start from, right? If you want to start from, like, I'm going to compare this against literally like all the best of the best, then yeah, it's not going to stack up.
Yeah.
But if you come in, decide to judge it against itself within what it is doing, with what it can, or what it has, yeah, like I guess I did a decent job, right? Like it was weird. It was like weirdly bad yet good at the same time. And like I said, like I was saying before when we started, I was trying to figure out like why, like what made it good, because there were parts where I'm like, it just doesn't, like, obviously it doesn't look real, right? Like it when it starts doing that wavy thing before it changes, like its skin is starting to, like, it just looks like puddles on its skin. I'm like, that looks almost like Reboot. Like the blood that comes down, you know what I mean? I mean, it was weirdly like, I'm like, it's good for how bad it clearly is. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like it is, but it's not like it. I don't know. Anyway, I found like graphics look the most real, like maybe 5 to 10 years after they started doing them, and have since started to, like, they hit a crest and now they're almost going back. Like, yeah. I watch Marvel movies and none of this looks real to me. You can just cut it. So, yeah. So, I mean, what I liked about it though, and I said this before when we first started talking about it, was, the way they frame the shots. And I think that had a lot to do with how much money they had and how they had to frame the shots. Because you would watch Western movies where they would have just so many frantic shots going on, and you're getting all this action going on, and every building is meticulously designed, even though it still somehow looks fake because of the movement. You would just have all this stuff happening, and the shots would be so unrealistic and like weird and incoherent and kind of like, I don't know, whatever. Like they're just so epic all the time. Yeah. And what I really liked about this is that they had like real, like interesting shots of the monster and stuff. I mean, yeah. I really like what these Western studios should take a page out of their book and maybe put some limitations on themselves, right? Give themselves some rules to work with, and not like, hey, I can literally CG everything that I want now. And it's like, no, dude, you can't do that. Like that. I think most people should go back to doing, if you can make it practical, do it. Well, like CG should be a last resort.
Like, not to pick on the prequels, but like I understand why like they were as CG as they were, but like an example being like Ewan McGregor, I honestly shudder to think what those movies would have been without him, especially Attack of the Clones, because so much of it is just him off by himself, like reacting to aliens, where it's like, you didn't even have a stand-in. Like,
that's insane.
You have to, like, of course, like the way they came up with the Camoans, it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to CG that. That's not, there's nobody who proportionally is like that.
They could, it just probably wouldn't have looked that great.
But
they like, just used animatronics and stuff.
Like that I understand, but it was just like, hey, okay, so we're coming up with what the design is going to be, but here's a stand-in, and it's a tennis ball hanging off of a stick. It's like, dude, put in an actual actor.
Yes, they need someone to bounce along. Yeah, for sure.
You need someone to emote off of.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like how they could do the Kaminoans, and like they could have done it, but I'm just thinking of like how much time and effort and money would have gone into just that one character, that one species, right? When you're probably paying like you contracted or you have an in-house CG team, so like why are you going to spend all this time and effort and money on like making a practical thing when you've already bought the team or you've contracted their services? This is just one more thing, right? So yeah.
And I like, even though Godzilla was like fully CG in this movie, I believe like to my knowledge, they still had like somebody doing the Andy Serkis not animatronic, but that kind of thing. I just can't remember the technical term. So it was
motion cap. Mocap?
There we go. I think it was there was some motion cap to a degree. So it was still like, okay, that so few people actually interacted with Godzilla, but it was still like, okay, we can do some of the practical stuff where it's like there's this chaos, or, hey, we're going to actually have you go down into a subway tunnel. We're going to have explosive noises. We're going to give you stuff to react off of. It's not just like the joke of all the party scenes that you get in movies or shows where it's like, there's no music. It's just they had that in post. It's just people talking and dancing to silence. Do you know how uncomfortable that is, and why those scenes always come off as awkward? That's a big component.
That's a good point.
Like,
I don't know that.
I found this movie like really did it well. To your earlier comment, like with the stuff where it's like it looked really weird or it might look bad, I'm like, you know what? I definitely agree with you, but I almost felt like that was to a degree on purpose, because this, like Shin Godzilla, one of the memes I've loved from it online is it's almost like it is just pain and almost rage incarnate. It is an abomination, and it almost like you look at that thing. And the first time I saw its design, like not even the little one that it as it grows, but that first design, I was like, what? That looks very different. But then it's also it's got enough similar to Godzilla where you're like, this is just a very interesting adaptation of it. But also its whole thing was like, this is a thing that should not exist. It can do things that it shouldn't be able to do. And as it's evolving, like in front of us, it's doing all these unnatural things that look weird as heck. So I'm like, you know what? I'm a little more forgiving of that. Like if it was like, it's easy to poke at and pick on like the 98 movie, but the 98 movie had its own reasoning stuff within why like Zilla acted the way Zilla did. If it was starting to do some of that weird stuff that like this Godzilla was doing, you'd be like, what's going on? This looks terrible. I'd take much more issue with it, right? So, am I making sense?
Yeah, no. Okay, so like what I mean, my first thought was like, well, at least the 98 Godzilla looked real. And then I thought, well, I mean, it was super dark. You know, the whole movie was so dark. And like,
this also wasn't trying to be something real.
No. But like, I mean, I'm not saying like it looked like something that exists. I'm saying it looked like it was literally there. Right? Like like it didn't look like a computer imposed image into a movie. And so when I like, I mean, look, man, I'm not saying they had the budget to do it real and they didn't, you know, but I'm saying like, yeah, okay, if we're going like, if you would allow me to compare it to CGI that does look good, sure. It does not. It is not convincing compared to CGI that is convincing, right? So, but it didn't, it was somewhat distracting to me. I'm not saying that it is going to be distracting to everybody. I think that in terms of like CGI, there's a lot of stuff to take into account, like context, like budget, like, you know, just there's a lot of stuff there. But yeah, no, I mean, it didn't, like I said, it looked good in a way, but bad in a way. Because there's a lot of CGI from like studios that have a lot more money that I'm like, it still doesn't look real. Like I said, like a lot of the Marvel movies don't look real to me. Like that doesn't look realistic, dude. And it's not the fact that could literally never happen in life. It's the fact that it literally looks like computer designed this and put it in like a real world, right? So that like there's stuff like that. So, but I mean, it looked real in like a weird way. It's like they sacrificed whatever real, like however, okay, so it's almost like there's two halves of a realism whole, right? And the Avengers and those big studios, they have one half, but they don't have the other half. And that other half, the Godzilla movie had, but they didn't have the half that the Avengers have or something, right? So it seems like there's always this bit of an uncanny, like there's room for the uncanny valley experience, right? When watching all of them. I don't know, man. It's weird. CGI seemed a lot closer to being real when it first came out in a lot of ways. But I think what I'm realizing is that a lot of it was just supplementing practical effects.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's where I'll always point to the first Jurassic Park, where it's like, hey, we built animatronics, but where we couldn't use it, we then use this. Like, we can't build a robotic T-Rex that is actually going to be chasing a Jeep down a street, but we've got a head and we can CG in the body moving. Like,
well, yeah, Spielberg, like at the time, he could have CG'd every dinosaur entirely, right? Yeah. He could have, but why didn't he? Like, obviously, like, I mean, well, okay, I don't know if he were to come back and make another Jurassic Park, I don't know what his stance would be on practical effects. I'm pretty certain, though, that he would be in favor of them.
Yeah. Well, as much as people rip on, rightfully, like the fourth Indiana Jones movie, because it's bad, like, at point they used practical effects where they could, and it was like there was a funness to that. Like it did look bad at points, but a lot of the points where it looked bad, I'm like, yeah, it would have looked bad if it was practical, because this section is just bad. Like it was going to be bad no matter what.
It would look bad if it were CGI, but
it did look bad when it was CGI. I'm like, I'm not convinced it would look good if it was practical either. It's just this section bad. Yeah. Like, and back to Shin Godzilla, and we'll wrap up because I think we're circling. But that's what we go into the weeds on so many different things, and I enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, when you like to me, like when I think of like Ghostbusters, like that kind of looked more real than a lot of stuff we see today. Like the way they did the it's not even CGI. It's like they're superimposing things onto the film, right? Yeah. That's way better than CGI, dude. As practical as you can make it. Get like even if it's only 2%. Get that 2% in there, man.
No, absolutely. Well, and with Shin Godzilla in specifically, I think it looked like the monster itself looked the best from like its fourth form onward, because then it wasn't like something that was, even though it still had points where it was like changing before your eyes, it's discovering its abilities. Like,
yeah, you know what's weird? Like, it's weird googly fisheye thing that I know for a fact people probably had an issue with.
They did.
To me, that was like, it almost like it was, again, dude, and all the things that made it look almost like ridiculous and fake also gave it like this weird realism, because I'm like, it's got fisheye, dude. That's the way it's supposed to kind of look right now, right?
Like, first time I watched the movie and I saw that part, I was like, why? What? I don't like that. And then I'm like, no, there's a reason.
That's creepy. Oh wait, yeah, but it's more like towards its fish state right now, right? Like it's still like a weird fish creature. Like,
and then like as it's evolving, and like it's going like figuring out how to stand up on the hind legs. It's got this weird chest bone sticking out and all that. I'm like, this looks weird, but I'm also, that's the point.
Like, it's almost making me uncomfortable, like, which is good. It's cool. It's like, you want that. You want, like, it's like, oh, this is kind of weird, gross. Like, what's gonna, I felt like, that's another thing where I'm like, oh, the weapons, like its weapons and when it would attack and stuff, it was like, I don't know, I kind of wanted more insight into the monster. You know?
Which is also like, I would love a follow-up to this movie, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. No. And it's one of those where I'm like, I want it, but I also don't, because I'm like, I love what you gave. And there's the risk of, if you continue it, you might potentially diminish it. But then also I'm like, but I want to know more. And I want to know like all that. Whereas the whole thing was, it's like, here's an abomination creature that should not exist, that is evolving right before our very eyes. It's learning what it can do as it does it, and it's not even sure if it likes it. Like, which was just such a fascinating take on Godzilla, a thing that has been happening for well over 50, like almost 70 years at this point. Like that in and of itself, where it's like, it's something that, like, for at that point it came out, it was like 62 years old. So yeah, because the first one was 1954 and Shin Godzilla came out in 2016. Something that you could, with a franchise that has had like almost 40 movies total, including the American ones, and then if you add in closer to like 45 or 46, a franchise that's that old and you can still come up with a fresh take. That's incredibly impressive.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of what kind of how the movie would be framed if we were going to get more insight into what the creature is possibly thinking, or whether or not it thinks. Like I think like if you're going to have a homunculus like creature that's sort of brainless and just like, you'll never get any insight to what it may be thinking or feeling, other than like maybe it's screaming when it gets hit by missiles or something. Like that's the extent to which you understand what's going on inside the creature's mind.
It just looks like it's screaming the entire time.
It really does, right? Like, okay, let's say just so it reacts to an attack.
Torn muscle, like teeth outside of the gums. You're like,
I just assumed it was supposed to look like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Its whole thing was like, it is a literal abomination. This thing should not exist.
Yeah, they seemed they seemed reverent towards it or something, you know? Like, they were like, it's the perfect organism. And I'm like, I don't know, dude. I'm pretty sure, like, it doesn't know what it's doing.
But, I upon further rewatches, I understood why they were taking that. Because they're like, it's evolving before our very eyes. And it's like, it's learning, and we're seeing like conventional stuff doesn't affect it. Like,
yeah, but all it's going
evolves,
to do is destroy.
But they're looking at like, as an organism, it is evolving instantaneously. It doesn't need any trial period or like to die once to figure out.
Yeah, but like, is that a good thing?
Morally, no. But if they're looking at it as like a life, just objectively like no morals as a life form, that's scientifically crazy impressive.
I mean, yes, yeah. By that one metric, within that one very narrow scope, yes, it is impressive that this thing can evolve spontaneously within a very short amount of time. I think literally, like, by any other metric, which there are like essentially an infinite amount. No, it's like, what is it? What is it? It's definitely not better than human beings, because, like, you know, we create and build and think and question our actions and not destroy things willy-nilly. Well, I guess we do, but you know what I mean. But no, like, I just thought
actual things that matter, fictional franchises, you know, we just destroy everything.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we destroy a lot. But yeah, I'm just like,
I get what you mean. I get what you mean. It's like, I also kind of enjoyed that reverence to a degree, because it's also like, how do we combat something that does this? Like, you can't reason with it, but it's not doing this out of malice. It's not like a terrorist or something that's trying to do this, strike fear. It's this creature that is instinctually reacting and moving forward, and that is destroying us. Like, how do we do this? And it's a representation of like nature, like natural disasters. Because a hurricane has no malice, but it results in so much destruction, and that's a fascinating take.
It's clearly like very, very cultural, right? Because not only have they had to face like you know, the nuclear bombs, right, but they also are constantly like facing earthquakes and floods and tornadoes and stuff like that. Like, it's a pretty in terms of like what meteorologically chaotic area, I guess, right? Yeah, so I think like there's this weird, like, not weird, but like, obviously it makes sense given the context, but there's like this instilled appreciation for things that are not within their control, that could like can essentially, like, their way of life, like cities are constantly being destroyed. I mean, there's always like a disaster going on. I think it's like, it's very like within their consciousness, and like where sort of at the forefront of their subconsciousness of like, oh, okay, like there are so many things that we're constantly being assailed by things beyond our control. And I think there sort of instills this natural like reverence or respect for things that will destroy you without any consideration, right?
Yeah. Well, I also know at like various points in the franchise's history, it's been like one of the takes, like GMK, which was one of the Millennium films. They took a very different approach, where Godzilla was almost like a spiritual thing, like basically a pissed off ghost of like people who were harmed by the actions of Japan from World War II. So it was like taking out that aggression on Japan. And so, like, Godzilla is just such a fascinating franchise where you can do that, where it's like looking at mankind meddling with things that it doesn't understand, resulting in it getting its like head or its butt whooped by its own hubris. Or it's like we're looking at our mistakes and what we might, like, we can eternalize as something we deserve, and that's so fascinating.
That is fascinating. That's a very interesting, like, it's the concept or the allegory of a monster coming and destroying a city. I did not realize was so flexible, right?
Yeah,
where you can map it on as somebody. I'm like, it's literally the exact same story every time. Monster comes, destroys city, people freak out, but you can like frame it in so many different ways, right? It's that's really interesting because like yeah I can see like you grow up in Japanese culture, Godzilla is such like I assume like in a lot of ways like sort of a mainstay or a pillar or a staple like a pop culture I guess in the subconscious, because not only does it relate to like it itself is now a part of history, never mind the fact that it itself is always a reference back to some part of history or historical event, or just part of their culture, right? Like it's sort of started to get baked into the culture, but now it can be used for other commentary. It's fascinating, and I could see why, like how that could proliferate into like people using it, like people who wouldn't necessarily toe the line of its traditional message, who maybe have like a message that may not be like totally mainstream, and be able to like adapt it to that message. That's really interesting. And because like for me, like it always felt like Godzilla was like a one trick pony. It's like literally the whole time it's an allegory from imperial aggression. And I guess in the sense where like if they're turning like the telescope or whatever back on themselves, that's still an allegory for imperial aggression, because as Japan was imperialist themselves, right? So
well, even like the original 1963 King Kong versus Godzilla, like the Japanese original, like yes, it still has so many of the silly aspects, and you can argue at points like it is a silly monster romp, but there was still a story and a statement that movie was making, because it was all about like a desperation for ratings relevance, like something that is relevant to where we are at in society now, where it was this company was like, okay, we're going to go get Kong, so everybody will be like this huge business wanting to basically have a mascot that they could slap a profit on. And then when Godzilla showed back up and was causing mayhem, it's like, well, bring in Kong, and it'll be like, not Panasonic, but it's like Panasonic's Kong defeated Godzilla. And where I'm like, that is such a fascinating message, where it's exploring like marketing and all that. But then the cut we got eliminated so much of that. Like just like the original, like the American adaptation of King of the Monsters removed all the allegory, where it was just like all the 50s monsters were like nuclear radiation, but it wasn't looking at like deliberate stuff of calling back to what your society went through 9 years ago, like exploring all that fallout through this vehicle.
Was Kong an allegory?
Like the original? No. You could maybe argue like exploitation.
Something slavery, but the connotations there of him, doesn't seem right. Go on.
No, I think if I think there is an allegory. Now, if we apply it specifically to African slaves, then that's where it gets very, very problematic. But if you apply it to the wider, just slavery in general, it's like, yeah, it's a representation of that. But it could have also been a representation of like man overreaching, man taking something that's just out of its environment, being like, hey, let's shoehorn it in ours for a buck for a profit.
The hubris of man.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
We got to wrap up soon, but like I recently watched the 1971 King, or not 71, I think it's 76, whatever, a remake that often gets forgotten. And I watched it for the first time, and I like really, really enjoyed it, because it was really going to that degree about like corporate business overreach and sponsorship. Like it got ugly where this guy was representing an oil company. So it wasn't about going to an island to film a movie and then, hey, to salvage everything, we've just found this giant ape, we'll bring it back. Like it was a company deliberately going to this place because they thought there was oil that they could get. And then when they found like the oil it will become oil that you can use in like 10,000 years, they then saw Kong, and it was all about like, how can we get him back? And we'll label him like our thing. And even when they brought out Kong, it wasn't like Kong on Broadway just standing like this. They brought him out in this giant gas tank, like a giant pump machine. And then it drops down and it's like, he represents all of this and packs on oil and all that. I'm like, dang, this is a really interesting statement on that. Like, and the disgustingness you get, because they were doing this terrible, like, corporate sanitized version of what the Islanders did as worship to Kong, and they do that as they're bringing Kong out, and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is a very interesting take, and there's so many fascinating things you can go with in there. And I like that movie a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, man. I mean, what is Kong? Kong's like an American property, right? Or is it a British property?
Oh, no. It was an American creation. And Kong was originally much more popular in Japan than Godzilla was. It's why in the original King Kong versus Godzilla, King Kong had top billing and won the movie. Kong was huge in Japan.
That's crazy. Well, I mean, yeah, when you think about it, like, a gorilla should, in theory, absolutely win every single time. But I don't know. That's just me.
If we're talking like a giant gorilla against a thing that can't be killed,
doesn't have arms, Chris,
has atomic breath,
doesn't have arms. That's you need arms. That's all I'm saying.
The recent Godzilla versus Kong shows that you don't.
Well, I mean, Kong can't fight with a crap. I mean, if it were me fighting and I was the giant monkey, I totally would have wasted that stupid lizard like within like 30 seconds, dude. I would have curb stomped him into irrelevance.
Kong in that movie can fight really, really well. It's a great movie.
I probably would have grabbed its eyes and then punched it in the throat as like hard as I could until like it just didn't breathe anymore.
I feel like we're just getting into the territory of like, I am Jimi Hendrix, and this is by me, Jimi Hendrix, and I am supreme because I am Jimi Hendrix. I feel like that's the territory we've gotten into.
I'm being completely serious right now.
Jimi Hendrix, am being...
You need to take me seriously when I talk about how I, as Kong, would defeat Godzilla. I mean, just think, like, when you think about how strong gorillas are, dude. Like, I don't. Anyway, he could rip its jaw, like it's. And I know he tries that in like literally every movie that they've been in together, where he tries to probably like open its mouth and rip its jaw and shit and stuff. But obviously, like when you think about it, it would definitely work. It would absolutely work when you think of the physics of it. I can't, like, it's a giant gorilla, Chris. You know how strong gorillas are?
Yeah, no, in most other movies where it's Kong against other animals, it works. But when a
gorilla could grab you and just rip you in half like toilet paper. You know,
I understand.
Split you like a log. Like
I understand that, but we're not applying. Also, Kong is not a real animal. But if we're applying real animals, sure. But we're also applying against a giant animal that has basically the base and the strength of a bear. When you put bears up against gorillas, that's an interesting fight.
I would love to see that fight.
But you're also adding in a giant tail that keeps the close fighter out of range.
Just launch your monkey self at it as fast and as hard as you can. And then it can't, I mean, just the weight alone, even if it tried to hit you with its tail, you would just, whoa, just the weight and the force.
But Godzilla is also like heavier and larger. Like, yes, there's momentum.
Bottom heavy? If you curl up, if you take a running start, you curl up in a ball, you send yourself through the air, you hit it near the top, you're gonna knock it over. I guarantee you.
But as it sees you coming, it's also gonna shoot the thing that will burn you because of your fur.
That's fine. That's fine. I doubt that laser has enough outward force to push you back. Like, it's called physics, Chris. Like, if for it to stop the monkey from flying through the air, it would need to be throwing itself backwards with the amount of force it's pushing that laser out. You understand what I'm saying?
We are talking about a franchise with giant monsters that physically would not be able to exist. Physics has no place in this argument.
What does that even mean? Okay, Chris. Okay, so then why even argue about it at all, right? Well, why even watch the movies? Because they don't make sense.
Because they're supposed to be fun.
And this is how I have fun, by arguing the physics of whether or not this is. I'm serious. This is interesting to me because when you think about it, if he launched himself through the air, for that mouth laser BS to stop. I mean, okay, here's the thing. I can see an argument being made that if he got hit with that laser, the mouth laser, it would literally go through him and kill him. Like, I can see that. Like, I'm willing to, but in the event that isn't the case, that it isn't strong enough to do that, him launching himself at Godzilla, he would make it there regardless of anything. The amount of, like, for that laser to push him back, to stop him, Godzilla would have to be pushed back farther, like, harder and faster than he's moving. You know what I'm saying?
I'm also going to argue because, that, one, you should check out the YouTube series. I think it's Death Battle.
Chris, have you ever seen a chimp murder another chimp?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, the strength of these little SOBs, you would not imagine. And they're not even anywhere near strong as gorillas. So then you make the gorilla as tall as a skyscraper. It's gonna be, it's just looking at, like, physically looking at, like, Godzilla and looking at King Kong, I'm like, dude, there's no way Godzilla. Or at least... Not the makeup of not Shin Godzilla with his little T-Rex arms and stuff. Like, he probably.
Well, but Shin Godzilla's beam was like a cutting beam. Like that was also
it cut.
That was also a very interesting take because so much of the time throughout, like, all Godzilla movies, it's the atomic breath does have a concussive force. And briefly while we're talking about that, Godzilla in Godzilla Final Wars basically slowed down and one-shotted an asteroid with his atomic breath. So I think he would win against a giant gorilla if we're applying that. But then also with Shin Godzilla, what I loved, it's been nicknamed online like the atomic death scene, and friggin' I love that scene so much, but also because it builds up to the atomic breath. Like, you get the smoke, and I also love that it shields its eyes, and it looks like, what the heck am I doing? But then it's like all the smoke comes out, and then it builds up into fire, and it's like the smog catches on fire. And then it pinpoints into the atomic breath, which is this cutting beam, which I'm like, that's awesome. Like, it's not just blowing up buildings, it's slicing through them. Love that scene. That
was dope, and I think that obviously makes a lot more sense, like, from a physics standpoint, because I think, like, for that asteroid thing to like, okay, so if it was shooting at the asteroid, if it was coming directly at it, it would never win, right? But because it has, like, the Earth underneath it and it's shooting upwards, right? Like, it's not, there's nothing, it's just gonna be pushed down into Earth, so it's not gonna be flown back. Like, there's. You know what I mean? I would like, I see it in my head.
It was the one time where having the high ground didn't result in a win.
No, if you're an asteroid, having the high ground is meaningless. It's irrelevant. A little PSA to all you asteroids out there.
You can't subscribe to Obi-Wan's School of the High Ground if you're an asteroid.
No, you cannot. It's just a fact. But I mean, like, I could see, like, it'd be so cool to see, like, to have Godzilla, like, firing at an asteroid, and then, like, just seeing the force pushing it into the Earth. Like, the ground cracking, like, all of a sudden it starts, like, being, and it's being pushed down. It's still shooting, right? But it's just driving itself into the center of the Earth with the force.
Within that scene, within Final Wars, it was like the asteroid was coming, and the asteroid contained monster, I think it was called Monster X, that ended up being a version of Ghidorah.
It was Cloverfield. That was Cloverfield.
But it was like...
Wait, didn't Cloverfield land in the ocean from an asteroid?
I think so.
Space?
I think so.
It was Cloverfield.
But, so it's like, I can't even remember how Godzilla just beat, like, a one-shot another monster, and it somehow sensed this asteroid was coming, because Final Wars was just like this wonderfully silly monster romp. And then it's like, it somehow knew this asteroid was coming because there was also aliens, and the asteroid was a monster and it was summoned by aliens, everything. But he did this thing right before where it's like he looks up and then he, like, grinds his feet into the ground and then sets his tail down almost to give him leverage. And that's where he, like, shoots up at the asteroid, and it almost pushes him down. Yeah. But then but like where the joke of the one shot comes in, like it gets down pretty dang near to him. And then when you see what the city was, it's just this desolate wasteland. And then Godzilla's just chilling there like, what up? That it? What we doing?
That's dope.
And then the ninja monster shrinks that like slowly falls down behind him. And you're like, what?
Oh, I got to watch that. It sounds cool. It reminds me of
ridiculously silly. Like it is not a Shin Godzilla.
Is that a cartoon?
No, but in a way, yes.
It reminds me of Dragon Ball Z, right? Where like you have them like shooting like a Kamehameha into the sky, and then like the ground around them is cracking, and they're being like cratering. You know? I've paused on it again, but I've been just because I like with anxiety and mental health and stuff, I haven't necessarily been in the mood for Dragon Ball Z or other shows, but I was watching Dragon Ball Z Kai, and I'm right halfway through the Cell Saga. I'm at the Cell games. I'm like, holy cow, this is awesome. Oh, that's perfect, because I have a meme to send you that you are going to love. It is dope.
I'll check it out once we're off the call.
They impose Bobby Hill in a scene with Cell, and he does something that's very funny. I'm not going to spoil it.
I'll check it out. But yeah, no, weirdly, I'll be like, Final Wars might be like Dragon Ball Z. Just Dragon Ball Z, it goes within its own logic, and like it treats itself a lot more seriously. Whereas Final Wars is like, look, it's just a fun popcorn flick. It's like Star Wars. It's got Star Wars influences. It's got the Matrix influences, and like 70s fun Shawa era, like the sillier Godzilla movies, all meshed into one. Where you're just like, all right, don't take this seriously. Just have fun. Yeah. They really. Whereas Dragon Ball Z does all that seriousness, but then you're also like, it does all that fun, but then it's also like there's stakes here.
Yeah, Final Wars, I really like from what I can see, like the practical effects. Like, I mean, it looks like a dude in a suit, but it actually looks more real than the CG, which is fascinating. I actually want to see this. This looks cool. I really like how they just went for, they're like, screw it, we're gonna make him look like how he did like originally, right? They just sort of, well, not originally, but you know what I mean. Like looks a lot more like the retro version. It's
I'll give you the heads up. It's also like an hour before Godzilla actually gets into the movie. He's in the opening credits, and then it's a lot of setup with the aliens showing up, and yeah.
Okay.
And then the last half is like the last chunk of the movie is, for the most part, Godzilla one-shotting like 20 different monsters. But it is also embracing the fun camp of what it was.
What's that one? Isn't there one that came out real recently where he just like, it was, the CG was just insane. Like it was all CG and he was fighting like all the monsters.
Oh, that might have been King of the Monsters. Love it.
I mean, it looked like you said, like just turn your brain off. It's going to be very pretty. It's going to be very frantic, in a lot of ways. Just chill out and enjoy the ride. And I think, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to watch this after we get off the
Oh,
show.
yeah. Dude, it's like, they're so much fun. I actually love King of the Monsters and Godzilla, Godzilla versus Kong, just because I'm like, it taps into something that, for me, that so many other movies don't, where I'm just like, it brings that almost like authentic child joy just up in me, where I'm like, not many other movies do this for me anymore. I'm like, I can't be too cynical about them. I'm just like, it just makes, it's unapologetically fun. And for so many of those monsters, like King Ghidorah in particular, like I used to, maybe you as well, because like we grew up in Toronto and Space Channel was on Channel 50. Like Saturday they do the just American dubs of like Godzilla movies. So even though they're clearly nowhere near as good as the Japanese originals, like you had that fun from when you were a kid. And the legendary movies and a lot of the other old Japanese movies like really tap into that. But with the American ones, they tap into it with a fantastic budget where I'm like, I've wanted to see King Ghidorah with a giant American budget since I was like 10. And this movie gave it to me. And it was awesome. Like, I'm not going to complain about some of the human stuff. Like, it could have been better. Sure. But what I'm here for is friggin' the three-headed dragon from space, and you made it a three-headed dragon from space with awesome fights. Like, it was just this unapologetic childlike joy. I friggin' love that movie. That and Godzilla vs. Kong, where I'm just like, it brings that like enthusiastic fun up for me, where I'm like, I cannot hate this movie. I'm just going to enjoy this.
That's what I wanted for the last Ghostbusters, but did not receive it. I'm hoping even this next one doesn't look like it's going to
get it. I'm hoping you get it.
I don't think it's going to scratch that itch, bro. I don't want to watch a bunch of kids. I don't care about kids. Kids. Not interested in their struggles. I'm not interested in their perspective. I want 4 dudes fighting ghosts. Okay, that's all I want.
It's really interesting. Like, this one's really, really interesting for me.
No, it could be. Yeah, no. Okay, Chris. Okay. No. How do you want? You want to talk about it? Is it going to be a good film? Quite possibly. Is it going to be the film I want? No, not at all.
No. I was just going to more so say, I'm like, every trailer I get from it, I'm like,
don't start with me, Chris.
Pardon?
Don't start with me. Okay?
I'm just like,
we've been having a very nice conversation. Okay, let's not.
Are we getting a gritty reboot? Like, that's what it feels like. Are we getting a gritty Ghostbusters reboot? Is that what anybody is looking for?
Well, people are like, wasn't Ghostbusters a comedy? I'm like, kind of, barely. I guess it was under the auspices of it being a comedy, but that it was never really funny to me. I never found it funny. I just found like the concept of 4 guys using science to actually, like, all of a sudden ghosts are now real and you can actually use real science and hunt them, and you have like tools that you use and it's dangerous, but and you're like, it's just so cool. Like that, yeah. I just like that as a concept is really, really neat how they marry science with the paranormal. I really, really love that. That was what was cool. I didn't care if it was funny or not, or goofy or wacky. None of that mattered to me. They could have done a completely serious version, completely like almost like Flatliners or something, right? Like, and I would have been fine with it. I think that's dope. Like, my favorite cartoon version of Ghostbusters was the one where they made when we were teenagers, right? Where they had the kid in the wheelchair, the black guy, the goth girl, the Mexican dude, right? Like that was my favorite because it was the most serious in tone. Like they ventured in territory where it's like, holy crap, man, maybe this shouldn't be on in the afternoon. Maybe kids shouldn't necessarily be watching this, right?
Yeah.
I really, that to me, best version ever. So I'm sort of like, okay, yeah, you got to sell toys. You got to get a new generation. I don't care about that. Make something that I want to see. But man, like in terms of like, I mean, I never really got into Godzilla when I was a kid. I mean, the closest I got was I had the Godzilla game for Nintendo, like literally the original Nintendo. And I would play it on there, and it was difficult and kind of didn't make sense. But I mean, I liked it. I thought it was cool to play as Godzilla, to have like the breath and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I never got in the movies. They just didn't look interesting. I'm like, I like the monster. I think that's interesting. But from what I could, like, from everything I got from it, I was like, it doesn't look like they focus on it in the way that I would want them to. That would make it interesting to me, right? So
no, and I definitely get that. And also now that you've mentioned like a video game, I want so badly for an amazing Godzilla game. If you could somehow do, it's a weird comparison, it really is, but if you could somehow do like Arkham, but with Godzilla, I would buy 12 copies of that game. Like 12 full-priced copies of that game. Like, so many things with so many Godzilla games that you can, one, they're hard to get now. There's the one which is fun, but it is just like a giant, like each level is Godzilla destroying something. So, like the defense force shows up and then they're trying to stop him and then you got to beat them. And then the monster shows up and you got to beat that. Like, it's a very generic premise that has existed in basically every Godzilla game. Mm-hmm. But if you could do something that's not that, like, I know you can't get as character driven as friggin' Arkham, but if you could treat it beyond just like, all right, let's just monster mash this thing, I would love that, and I think it's got so much promise.
In my head, I'm just imagining Arkham, like Arkham City or Arkham Knight, but with Godzilla in a Batman costume.
If you gave that as an alternate skin, I'd be down.
have you? There's a game released for the PS4 in 2014.
Yeah, no, you can't, like, it's not available on the PSN to North America anymore. I think it's got to do with distribution rights. And then the only copies I can find are on eBay, and they're in the $200 to $500 range. And that's just frankly not happening.
Why is it? Why? That's crazy.
Like, I'd play the crap out of the game. I know what that game is, and I would still love it. But I think this is it's a game. Like, Godzilla is a franchise where you can have both, and I'm like, okay, give me the other one. For a while with Godzilla, I was, you know how you were just like, give me what I want?
Yes.
Like, I was like that with Godzilla, but I was like, I only want the serious. Only give me the Japanese original. And then I'm just like, there's so much fun to be had with this because it was this thing. It's not just this. As much as I love that one more so, I'm trying to loosen up on that. Just like even with Batman, like Batman's to me the same example. Like, is Batman 99% of the time more serious? Yes, absolutely. But I'm not going to be like, no, it can never be the campy stuff. It can never be the 60s thing. Because there is an audience for that. There was, like, that was Batman for that decade. Not even just because of the show. That was the tone of the comics at the time. And it's when DC started doing their Batman 66 comic line, freaking loved it. Where it's like, okay, because you've still got regular Batman. It's not, this is the only one. So with Godzilla, that's been the great thing over the past bunch of years, especially with Legendary being able to make some and Toho being able to make some. It's like, hey, you can have your different flavors and you can enjoy both at the same time. It's not like, hey, here's the one you don't want, like you, Chris, don't want, but other people do. Yeah. I mean, you know, I intellectually I understand that. No, I also really get where you're coming from.
I can't justify that my version should be the only version, but like deep in my heart, I know that to be the truth. So, you mean believe? No, I know it.
I feel like I'm just we're getting to an area that you, I, and Tom got to with our Ninja Turtles episode.
Well, yeah, I'm of the mind where it's like, okay, obviously in polite society, I can't say this, but I mean, if you were to really press me, I would say, yes, absolutely. I am right. People should listen to me and not make any other version because the other versions are dog crap. So.
All right, I feel like we got to wind down because oh my gosh,
time to stop. I can't believe we taled for yet another 2 hours.
I know
5 hours and 20 minutes. We've been 5 hours.
We've been talking for 5.5 hours.
Yes, 5.5 hours. Yeah,
bonkers. All right, so as we wind this down, listener, I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I actually have heard from some people saying they enjoy with Into the Weeds how we just go. So that's been encouraging. I encourage you, check out Shin Godzilla. I'm not going to think less of you if you don't like it as much as I do. Like, I know you don't, and I also get why, but it's also, it's fun to talk about. And for me, it's fun to hear someone else's opinion from someone who's not as into it as I am or as into the franchise as I am, because these are fun, healthy conversations.
Yeah.
Needs to happen in our fandoms more.
Yeah, dude, I totally agree. And I think it's really helpful to come out and like be able to recognize and admit that like when you're a fan, if you can say, hey, yeah, I'm a fan, then you're sort of getting out in front of like, yeah, I'm biased, right? Like there are things that I can't necessarily separate myself entirely from this property, right? Like there's something I always try to make that like distinction when I'm sharing strong opinions about things that are generally subjective, where I'm like, listen, I'm a fan. Like I'm not necessarily capable of speaking completely objectively about this, right?
Well, and even still, like when we'll have conversations about stuff we're the same fans of, but for from different aspects, like
to different degrees as well,
to different degrees, or like I'm a fan. Like, I'm a fan of this tone of it more than, like, you're a fan of something's tone more of it than, say, I am. Yeah. Then it's like, hey, we'll still disagree, but we're not going to go at each other. about it. Like we'll hash it out and we'll be like, I think I'm right, you think you're right, but we'll at least hear each other and we'll be like, no, you're not a real fan. Screw you. You're the worst.
Oh,
you're destroying this property. Fandoms ruin things that I love.
Yeah, people who do that, that's sort of crazy. I get I want to do that. Believe me, I really want to do that. I want to say, hey, like not you in this instance, but like to people who don't agree with me, I want to tell them they're not real fans. I just know in my heart that's not true, dude. You can't, intellectually that's not true.
Well, it's like, also, I saw so much of that, like when for that year where not even a year. Like I got more and more into metal, like metal music, but the metal fans were driving me crazy because it's like, no, if you're a fan of that, then you're not a real fan of this. It's like,
oh gosh,
shut up. Just because you don't like that piece doesn't mean like, I do makes me less of a fan. It just means I appreciate something you don't, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like
have a little humility and like maybe be open to the possibility that you might not actually comprehend everything that's going on at the moment, or you might not see things from every perspective that I could possibly be seen or appreciated from, right?
Well, or even for me, even in like simple terms, like my younger cousin Sam, like he's been on the podcast, hasn't been in a while. Shout out to Sam. You're awesome. You're married now, and I know you're crazy busy. Love you, buddy. Miss ya. But at points we would talk about movies, and even earlier, like we would talk about, say, the prequels. And even as he grew up, he still didn't like hate Jar Jar Binks. And but he's just like, look, that was just there. Like I understand why people don't like him. Like, and then he's not my favorite by any means, but I don't vehemently hate this character. And I'm just what? That's kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, neither. Like, I think people who do, like, that's sort of, they've like, they have like some part of their identity at stake when they feel the need to do that. And that's just transparent and sad and pathetic.
If you like this thing, you're not a real fan. If you like Rey, then you're the worst. It's like, okay, no, they just like a character that you don't. And I'm not going to say they're a well-written character. We're not going... Sorry,
I can get into that because...
But if for me, if someone just enjoys it, I'm not going to be like, you're wrong for enjoying it. I'll be like, I don't get why you enjoy it. I don't like this character for X, Y, and Z. But if you do, you know what? Power to you. If you can like something that I like actively annoys me, if you can enjoy that, cool. I would much rather not be annoyed at something. I would much rather enjoy something. So if you can, power to you. Power to you.
I feel like people who like Rey as a character don't deserve to watch movies.
Oh my gosh. All right.
Really? They put so much effort into making this. Well, I guess technically, because it is a movie. And you're just going to sit here and like it uncritically? Like, what's wrong with you? like, make it work a little bit to get your approval. But right? I don't know, dude. I don't know. I guess like fine, whatever. Right? If you can just shallowly enjoy content like that, then good for you, I guess. I'm jealous almost because you don't have to go. You get to like things. That's why I'm jealous, because you're not like me. You don't get you're blind to all the clear and obvious faults that are just so heinous that you can just go in blindly and just like a homunculus enjoy whatever's projected onto your eyes. And
or they can recognize them but just still be like, eh. If you can do that, at one point I'm like, hey, I like caring about a lot of these things, but also I like not being upset. Like that.
I also like not. Well, I mean, yeah. I like not being upset for a stupid reason. You know?
It's more so if you're like, okay, now I'm still not going to say someone's like not a real fan, but where I'll get more like, what? Is where you'll be like, no, all this terrible stuff is fine for X, Y, and Z. I'll be like, no. You can enjoy it, but don't tell me it's not this. Like now we have to. Okay. Now we have to have the discussion because I can show you that it's not. I'm not saying you don't have to enjoy it, but you can recognize that it's bad. You can still enjoy something being bad. That's fine. I'm not saying you have to hate it.
On how dope the color blue is, just don't sit here and tell me I'm not looking at the color blue, okay? Because I'm definitely looking at the color blue right now. You're gaslighting me, these people. Yeah, it's crazy. There's so many times where like I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt so much that I feel like I'm being gaslit, and it's just in reality they're just ignorant, and I should have never given them the benefit of the doubt. Like I'm giving them too much credit.
or for me, at times where I'll check myself is I'll be like, all right, I'm ready to argue. I'm ready to do this. And someone just be like, look, I don't watch things at the level you do. Like I'm just wanting to sit down and enjoy this. Like, that's it. I'm not looking at it with like 10 years of fandom in it or something like that. It's legit. Like at points where I talk to some people about like, say the older Fox X-Men movies. If someone was like, I really enjoyed X-Men 3, I'm like, I hate that movie so much because it's such a terrible version of so many characters and good stories. And then they're like, I just wanted a light action movie. Like, I don't know all that. I'm like, you know what? Cool. That's cool. If you don't have all that baggage, you don't have all this, you're not all that, like you're just looking for that. I'm not going to say you're less of a fan. You're coming at it from a different viewpoint, a different fandom viewpoint. And if you're enjoying it, awesome. I'm going to always say it's a bad movie, but I'm not going to be like, you're the worst for enjoying this, because that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, like not to your face or anything, but definitely behind your back to other people. Yeah, no, that's one thing. My dad really liked the original X-Men movies, and I think it's because he grew up with the comics, right? Well, and he's a big fan of Patrick Stewart.
And it's so interesting, just like, especially with where we're at now with, I'll go with any geek property. Like even compared to the 90s with X-Men, but I'll even toss out with the 98 Godzilla. Like comic book movies and that, they used to just be like, look, we can put the names of these characters on and they're not going to be like accurate representations of these characters or those stories. And it's almost like, not in the condescending way that people will read into it. It's like, we're going to throw them a bone to make money. It's like, no, we're just going to do this, but we don't think we don't think the comic audience is that big and that they're going to give us all the money we want. So we're just going to make this as whatever is possible. And now we live in an age where it's like, oh, look, we can do things that will please that very vocal audience who might influence the non-audience but still do stuff that appeals to the non-audience. Like we're at a point now where we're getting a lot more of, to a degree, like you're not getting like panel to page or like Godzilla 2014 was not a direct in any way, shape, or form the direct remake or reboot of whatever of the Japanese Godzilla movies. But it was like, that's an honest adaptation. They changed the origin a bit, but that looks like Godzilla, and they're doing their own context and their own story. And as a Godzilla fan, I'm like, that's awesome. A character that I love is being done differently, but still done justice, and it's getting the brand out there. That's really cool.
Yeah, I would say like the hardcore fans of like any property are the ones who sort of drive it, right? They're the ones who drive like the hype. They're the ones who sort of command the communities, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. So a lot of the narrative, I think, is driven by those people, and if you don't satisfy them first and foremost, they can be your worst enemies, right? So yeah, and I think a lot of these, a lot of the biggest fans generally are on the same page. They like things for the same reason. There's like a general consensus as to what's good and what's bad and what should be and what shouldn't be. So I think, I think no matter what, if you're going to like try and make a movie or a cartoon or whatever of like a pre-established intellectual property that has a very large fan base, an active fan base, then you should really kowtow to the leaders of said community. I think you should, because they're going to be your biggest friends moving forward. They're going to do I don't think there's a replacement for people like that, for the biggest fans. There's no replacement.
I can definitely agree with that. That's why I was thrilled in King of the Monsters. They didn't have to include that Ghidorah was from space. That was a great little thing they threw in, because I'm like, that's one of the funly sillier aspects from Godzilla that I never expected to be carried over into
I mean, it's interesting to me.
The new franchise. Well, yeah, but then other people will just be like, "Oh, okay, we're already doing with like giant monsters. Like this is silly." And
well,
to a
at that
degree,
point, it's like, why not?
Well, yeah, exactly. To me, I'm like, it's already silly.
Monsters? Why not have one?
It's already silly. Why not?
But where else do they come from?
But it was still, that was something they didn't have to do, and then they did. I was like, that's awesome. I appreciate this even more now.
Yeah, fan service. It's like, why not? Like, there would be no point in changing it. Like, you might as well just make it from space to make people who are fans of the original who got in on the ground floor dig it, right?
I get to a degree, I can also understand why they wouldn't have gone with it, where it's like, hey, we're already doing a giant 3-headed dragon. That might be a hurdle for somebody to get on board with, because the people already look at like, oh, it's just a giant silly monster movie. So no, people.
No, well, yeah, but when you look at Godzilla, it looks like a lizard. Okay, we got lizards. That makes sense. When you look at Hydra or whatever, it's like, okay, we don't have any 3-headed dragons on Earth, so I'm just sort of confused as to where it might have come from. No, right? But yeah, okay. So I think we've probably gone long enough, eh?
Yeah, no, we're gonna wrap up now. We are both very tired. Christian, I'm so sorry.
No, me too.
But I really enjoyed today's episode, and listener, I hope you did as well. We are going to do more Into the Weeds episodes. One I really want to do may not be an Into the Weeds episode. It might be another sub-series on the podcast, but I still want to have you on it because I think you're my first and foremost Ghostbusters guy. If there is enough material, because I'm honestly not sure, I'd love to. I'm loving doing the Unmade series, but I also especially love it when someone else is really into it. I kind of want to check out an Unmade Ghostbusters episode, and I'd love to do that with you.
Yeah, that'd be dope.
So if we find there's enough material, listeners, that is coming your way. And we will also do more Into the Weeds. We're both just trying to get back into the swing of things.
Yeah, man.
And I actually heard from some people even though these are the episodes that I go the longest on, and both you and I are like, oh my gosh, we went like 2.5 hours. That was because also we'll go like 3 hours before.
Yeah.
We're coming up on 6, and we're both just like, man, that was a marathon. That's going to be a lot to edit. Some of the feedback I've gotten is they're like, I really enjoyed that though. Like I like at times they like the longer form or the shorter form, but they're like, you guys never drag because you're going off into the weeds about various things, and then you come back. So that's encouraging, because I'm looking at this time. I'm like, all right, this is going to be a daunting one to edit. But it's like, all right, people will still dig it, and I like that.
Yeah, I like how we can sort of bring different perspectives to things, but we never I think there's other podcasts that I've listened to that do that, but it always seems, I don't know, man. I don't know I can't put my finger on it. It just seems kind of like it seems a little too passive aggressive. Like they're still friendly and stuff, but there does seem to be a little it's just a little abrasive. There's a little friction there, and I think with us, we really don't have that. Like we really even if we technically disagree, we're so open and honest and willing. I'm willing. For instance, I'm willing. I am willing to admit when I'm wrong, but I'm also willing to admit hey. I understand what I'm saying right now is not an objective truth, right? I understand, this is a completely fallible, biased thing that I'm expressing. So, yeah. No,
and also I think with us, it's it helps that we've been friends since we were 8 years old, and between us, I honestly don't think there's any ego or anything. We both humble ourselves and check ourselves, and at points if we're just look, I'm in a spot where for whatever reason I'm taking whatever offensive, we're also both grown up enough to be okay, my apologies, I'm going to try not to do that, and we also recognize that was never the intention.
With you
we're just open and honest.
Yeah, man. Yeah, with you I'm so much more willing to just be oh, okay, that's probably my fault, or at most more, not even that, not even I'll just write it off as my fault without even knowing. But most of the time, and dude, I don't know how to explain it. There's just like you said, there's no ego there. It's fully dude, I'm fully willing to be wrong in your presence. If it's there's I never really feel like there's a competition between us in any way whatsoever. No. And that's one of the things I've loved about our relationship, and it's also been we'll always go to hear out the other person. There's been, even us, we've recorded a bunch of episodes that have never seen the light of day, and we're just all right, we're just not going to do them.
it might be one where I'm like, I can't think of anyone in particular, but it might be one where you're like, are you sure? And I'm just like, yeah, dude, I don't like how I came off, or the audio was X or Y. And then there's been times where you're like, are you sure? Like, I didn't like how I came off, or X or Y. And we'll also we'll try to be like, all right, let's see. Or we'll just both be bluntly like, nope. Like the audio sucked, or I was feeling off that day, or it's like, well, I really enjoy doing these with you. And people have said like that they see how our relationship comes off, and I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the fact that we're having a good time probably, it probably translates, right?
And it definitely makes like a 2 hour and 40-minute marathon go a lot easier.
Yeah, man. Well, I don't understand these people. Like, oh, I got to listen to a podcast in one sitting. Just like when you're doing something wherein like you can listen to a podcast, throw it back on. Like, dude, like I'll leave my room to go get some chocolate milk downstairs or something, and it's like maybe a minute, and I'll still put my earbuds in and listen to a podcast for 1 minute. Right? Just because I'm like, I'm just doing it. As I'm doing something, like I have nothing. But that's, to be fair, that is a lot. That's like a huge anxiety thing of like ADD, where it's like, I need to have something happening. I can't literally walk for 1 minute in silence with my thoughts. Like I can't do it.
I definitely get that. Well, for me also, like I have to listen to like podcasts or sermons or like, maybe comedy specials, but anything where it's like, hey, it's people talking or trying to like make a point about something. Mm-hmm. If it's not music or a movie or a show, I got to have it at 2 times the speed. Like I will zone out, even if it's a topic that's interesting to me, and I'll zone out for like 5 or 10 minutes. And then I'll be like, man, I got to rewind. And I've had to rewind like 5 times today. I don't want to finish this. I'll get back to it later. And it'll be like a year or 2 later. And I was finding that with reading or audiobooks, sermons, whatever. Whereas like if it's 2.5 times the speed, I have to pay attention.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, if I zone out for 2 minutes, I'm missing 4.
Yeah. For me, like I get like huge attention fatigue if I'm not intrinsically motivated to pay attention to something.
Yeah.
So if I ever like, no matter what, like even if I put it on 2 times or whatever, like I don't know, dude. Physically, I'm like, no.
Yeah, no. I'm like, if I can't pay attention to it, I'm not going to listen to it.
What I found is that I can pay attention to podcasts, no problem, but audiobooks, in one ear and out the other, and I don't know why. It's weird. But like, we gotta go.
Yeah, no, we'll wrap this up.
Stop talking to me, Chris. Let me go.
All right, well, dear listener, thank you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and all the many directions we went.
It's like, okay, my son's having a tantrum. I gotta get him out of here.
Well,
thanks everybody for coming.
It's also Luna's looking at me like, dude, you've been ignoring me for 6 hours.
Stand up.
Play with me. So all that being said, and also we will get better at this, but we also love it. So all that being said, hope you enjoy, take care, and God bless, my friends. Peace.
Peace.
Oh, it'll be like, hey, everybody. So the reason we're laughing is because I did the sound effect of what you just heard, but you didn't hear that in particular. The reason you're hearing us now again, when you'd normally hear the end credits, is because Christian and I can excitedly share and drop dime about something that we've got coming. We got in the works that's going to be it's going to be dropping on September 8th. So Christian, what are we calling what we're doing again, my good sir? Because we've been talking about potentially spinning off this series, but we've decided to start our own. So what are we doing, my good man?
Oh, okay. Well, we used to do a segment together, or like a special episode of your podcast together called Into the Weeds. Yep. And then we decided that perhaps the nature of the things we want to cover, or the manner in which we want to cover them, might not be particularly appropriate for your podcast. So we decided that, hey, maybe we should make our own. And the name, we were going to keep Into the Weeds, but I felt like it was a little too on the nose, and that we could have found something better. And I mean, it's subjective, but I feel like we did. I feel like we came to a better name. So the name is basically an amalgamation of like my Twitch name and Chris's podcast name. So it'll be the Radio Arcade podcast.
Yay! Yeah. So this is something Christian and I have been toying with off and on for a while now, and you can hear all about that in our first episode, which will be dropping on September 8th, the Wednesday, and it'll be through Red Circle. And if it's not on, we're going to be setting up its own socials and stuff as it goes, so that way if people want to directly interact with it or us through it or specifically about it, you've got ways, but that takes time to set up and focus that I don't always have. So we'll have that set up for as close to September 8th as possible. And if for whatever reason it's not popping out, it doesn't sync up with, say, Podbean right away, hit me up over my 2099 OCR Twitter handle or Christian's Carpenter Arcade Twitter handle, and we'll make sure that you get that link, because we're excited to share this and start this new thing. And you can hear more about the idea of its origin in this quick synopsis on Wednesday, September 8th. Looking forward to seeing you guys then, and we will be back in a couple weeks for our regular episodes of One Cross Radio. Peace.